The hero billboard chart announcement filled the convention center with artificial brightness. Cameras tracked Enji Todoroki as he stepped onto the stage, flames rippling across his shoulders in controlled waves. The number one position had finally arrived, decades after he'd first reached for it. Applause echoed through the hall, polite rather than enthusiastic. Everyone knew this wasn't the succession Japan had wanted. Endeavor's jaw tightened as he gripped the podium. The microphones caught every word, broadcasting to millions who'd watched All Might's final stand just weeks earlier.
I will shoulder this responsibility.
No smile, no raised fist. Just the acknowledgement that someone had to stand where the symbol of peace once stood. Hawks took the stage next, wings folded tight against his back to avoid knocking over the display screens. Number 2, the youngest hero to reach the rank according to the scrolling statistics beneath his image. He grinned for the cameras waved, made it look easy, but his eyes tracked the exits. Counted security personnel assessed crowd density with the automatic precision of someone trained to see threats in every crowd. The questions came fast. Reporters shouted over each other, microphones thrust forward like weapons. How would Endeavor fill All Might's role? What did Hawks think about supporting the new number 1? Did they feel ready for this responsibility? Endeavor answered in clipped sentences. Hawks deflected with jokes that got uncomfortable laughs. Neither mentioned the obvious that the world had watched their strongest pillar crumble. And these two were all that remained to hold up the weight. 3 days later, Endeavor stood on a Kyushu rooftop with Hawks at his side. The sun had started its descent, painting the city in shades of orange that matched the flames still dancing across Endeavor's costume. Below them, evening traffic crawled through intersections. Normal people heading home unaware that their new symbol of peace was testing the foundation beneath his feet.
Intelligence says there's been unusual Nomu activity in this sector. Higher-end models, smarter than the cannon fodder we usually see.
Endeavor stared at the skyline.
How reliable is your source? Reliable enough that I'm here instead of doing the 17 interviews my agency scheduled.
Hawk stretched his wings, each feather catching the fading light.
Besides, you need the field time. Can't build a reputation on the press conferences.
The temperature spiked. Flames erupted from Endeavor's shoulders, bright enough to cast sharp shadows across the rooftop.
I don't need lectures from...
The building shook. Not an earthquake. Something had struck the structure 40 floors below, hard enough to make the steel frame groan. Hawks's feathers shot outward in a defensive perimeter as both heroes moved to the roof's edge. A hole had been punched through the building's eastern face. Not blown out, punched as if something had simply walked through reinforced concrete and steel like they were rice paper. Smoke poured from the wound, and inside the darkness, something moved. It stepped into the light. Black skin stretched over grotesque musculature. 4 eyes tracked the heroes with unsettling intelligence. The creature's brain was exposed, pulsing with each breath. And when it smiled, the expression carried calculation rather than mindless aggression.
High-end. That's a high-end Nomu.
The creature spoke, voice rough but coherent.
Strong. You are strong.
It flexed fingers that ended in claws designed to shred flesh.
Fight me.
Endeavor's flames roared to life, turning blue at their core. He launched himself forward without hesitation, because that was what the number 1 hero did. Flames spiraled around his fist as he drove it toward the Nomu's exposed brain. The creature caught his arm. Its flesh burned, blackened, but regenerated even as Endeavor watched. The Nomu's other hand shot forward, claws raking across Endeavor's chest, hard enough to draw blood through his heat-resistant costume. Hawks's feathers struck from 6 angles simultaneously, each one sharp enough to pierce concrete. The Nomu swatted them aside with its free hand, never releasing its grip on Endeavor's arm. It pulled the number 1 hero close enough that Endeavor could see his own reflection in those 4 calculating eyes.
Weak.
Then it threw Endeavor through the building. Hawks dove after him, wings beating hard enough to create whirlwinds in the confined space. He caught Endeavor 3 floors down, both of them crashing through office cubicles and computer equipment. Emergency alarms shrieked. Sprinkler systems activated, hissing against Endeavor's flames.
It's toying with us. This thing is way above.
The Nomu crashed through the ceiling. No warning, no dramatic entrance. It simply appeared and swung a fist that would have decapitated Hawks if the younger hero hadn't jerked backward on instinct. The blow still clipped his shoulder, sending him spinning into a support column hard enough to crack the concrete. Endeavor surged forward, flames condensed into a white-hot spear. The attack connected, burning through the Nomu's chest, creating a hole the size of a basketball. The creature looked down at the wound. Then it looked at Endeavor and regenerated. Muscle knitted back together in seconds. The Nomu's grin widened.
More, show me more.
What followed was systematic destruction. The Nomu didn't just fight it, tested, probed, found every weakness in Endeavor's technique, and exploited it. When the number 1 hero tried to create distance, the creature closed the gap with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something its size. When Endeavor planted his feet to deliver maximum firepower, the Nomu attacked from angles that forced him to choose between offense and defense. Hawks did what he could. His feathers harried the creature-created openings, pulled Endeavor out of lethal strikes at the last possible second. But he was supporting, not fighting, because getting close to this thing meant getting torn apart. The battle spilled through 6 floors. Office workers evacuated in panic. Structural supports groaned under the stress. And through it all, news helicopters circled, broadcasting every moment to a nation that had just been promised a new symbol of peace. Endeavor's flames began to flicker. Not from lack of will, but from simple physical limitation. His quirk generated intense heat, and that heat was cooking him from the inside out. Sweat poured down his face. His movements grew sluggish. The Nomu noticed.
Tired already, the number 1 hero. This is what replaced All Might.
Hawks sent every remaining feather at once. The blade struck the Nomu's arm, its neck, its exposed brain. Some pierced flesh. Most glanced off hide that had grown tougher as the fight progressed. The creature turned its head, regarding Hawks with 2 of its 4 eyes.
You next.
Then it slammed Endeavor through 3 floors of reinforced flooring. Hawks dove, wings screaming from the strain. He caught Endeavor again, but this time, the number 1 hero didn't stand up. Blood covered most of his costume. His breathing came in wet, ragged gasps. One arm hung at an unnatural angle.
Get clear. You'll die.
Hawks pulled them both toward the nearest window. His feathers were depleted wings, torn from taking hits meant for his partner.
We're retreating. The civilians are already evacuated. We did our job. Living to fight another day is also part of the job.
Hawks crashed through the window glass, raining down 40 stories to the street below. His damaged wings caught enough air to turn their fall into a controlled descent rather than a suicide drop. Behind them, the Nomu stood in the shattered building, watching them flee. It didn't pursue. It had made its point. They landed in the street where emergency services had already established a perimeter. Paramedics rushed forward. Hawks let them take Endeavor, then collapsed to his knees as his legs finally gave out. Around them, phones pointed, recording, uploading. Within minutes, the footage would circle the globe. The number 1 hero beaten. The number 2 forced to retreat. And somewhere in the wreckage above them, a high-end Nomu stood victorious, still smiling. Across Japan, television screens showed the same image on infinite repeat Endeavor, being loaded into an ambulance unconscious, while Hawks stood nearby with wings too damaged to fold properly. The headline underneath was simple. Symbol of peace defeated. In a bar in Yokohama, a man with pale blue hair, watched the broadcast and laughed. Tomura Shigaraki had spent months planning, coordinating, pushing pieces into position. The attack on Endeavor wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to break something more fragile than bones. It was meant to shatter faith.
Teacher was right. You don't need to destroy heroes, you just need to prove they can bleed.
The doctor who had created the high-end Nomu adjusted his glasses, watching the medical team's work on Endeavor through multiple camera feeds.
Hood performed admirably, better than projected. The regeneration upgrades exceeded expectations.
Shigaraki's fingers twitched, that old habit of scratching at his neck when ideas formed too fast for words.
How many more do we have? 11 comparable specimens.
The doctor pulled up files, each one showing a different Nomu in various stages of development.
Though deploying them all would be inadvisable. Resources are finite. Resources don't matter if we win.
Shigaraki stood decay spreading across the wooden table, where he'd been resting his hands.
All might is gone. Endeavor is broken. Japan is terrified. This is when we push. Find their next attempt at a symbol, find whoever they try to prop up as the replacement, and crush them before they can take root.
The television continued its coverage. Reporters speculated about Endeavor's condition, about Hawks' capabilities, about whether Japan's hero system could survive another blow. Nobody had answers. Everyone had fears. In a hospital room in Kyushu, Enji Todoroki lay unconscious, hooked to machines that monitored vitals, still struggling to stabilize. His family hadn't arrived yet. The news had only broken 20 minutes ago, but they would come, and they would see what the world had already seen, that their father had tried to fill impossible shoes and been crushed beneath the weight. Outside the room, Hawks sat in a plastic chair, wings finely folded despite the pain it caused. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from his agency, from the Hero Public Safety Commission, from contacts in the government. Everyone wanted answers he didn't have. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand.
The doctors say he'll live, assuming no complications, but he'll need extensive...
I know.
Hawks didn't look up from his phone. Another message. Another demand for explanation.
How long until he can fight again?
The nurse hesitated.
That's not something we can...
Months, years, never. Pick one.
We don't know yet.
Hawks nodded. That was an answer in itself. He stood, ignoring the way his body protested, and walked toward the window. Below, crowds had gathered despite the late hour. Some held signs supporting Endeavor. Others looked angry, betrayed, demanding to know why their new symbol had failed them so quickly. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a priority message from the commission. He answered.
We need you at headquarters. Emergency session. Every available hero above rank 50.
When...
Now.
Hawks ended the call. He looked back at the hospital room where Endeavor lay broken, then at the crowds below, who didn't understand that their fear was exactly what the villains wanted. They'd done more than defeat one hero tonight. They'd opened a wound in the country's faith, and Hawks could already see it starting to bleed. He walked toward the elevator, each step sending fresh pain through damaged muscles. His wings dragged, slightly too injured to hold their usual proud angle. But he kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging what he already knew. They were losing. Not the battle, not even the war. They were losing the thing that mattered most, the certainty that heroes would always win, that evil would always fail, that tomorrow would always come. All Might had given Japan that certainty for decades. Endeavor had held it for 3 days. Now nobody knew what came next. The elevator doors closed. In his reflection on the polished metal, Hawks saw exactly what the public would see. When he arrived at headquarters, a young hero doing his best to hold together something already falling apart. It wouldn't be enough. It was never going to be enough. And somewhere in the city, the Nomu called Hood stood atop the building where it had made its stand, watching emergency lights flash below like fireflies trapped in a jar. It had proven its strength. It had broken the symbol. Now it waited for new orders, patient and content. The night stretched on. Cameras kept recording. The wounded were transported to hospitals. And across Japan, millions of people went to sleep, wondering if they would wake to a world where heroes still mattered. The answer, though none of them knew it yet, was already taking shape in a place none of them were watching. Not in a hospital, not in a villain's lair, not in any of the usual spaces where destinies were decided, but on a quiet street near UA High School, where something that shouldn't exist was about to wake up. The footage played on every screen in Japan. Endeavor falling, Hawks retreating. The number 1 and number 2 broken in minutes. News anchors repeated the same questions with different words. Searching for answers nobody could provide. How had this happened? What came next? Who would protect them now? The Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters occupied a building designed to project authority. Clean lines, security checkpoints, conference rooms with soundproofing thick enough to contain state secrets. Right now, those rooms contained something more volatile than classified information. Panic dressed in professional language. 18 pro heroes sat around a table too large for the conversation. Most ranked in the top 50. All understood why they'd been summoned at 3 in the morning. The screen at the room's head displayed a map of Japan, red markers blooming across major cities like a spreading infection. Crime incidents, villain sightings, civil unrest. Each one logged in the 12 hours since Endeavor's defeat. A woman in commission uniform stood at the podium. Her voice carried the flat efficiency of someone delivering bad news as routine business.
Reported incidents are up 43%. Actual numbers likely higher. Citizens aren't calling for help. They don't believe help will arrive.
Hawk sat near the back posture, relaxed despite exhaustion that had settled into his bones. His wings were folded tight, still healing from tears that would take days to close properly. He'd refused medical leave. Sitting in a hospital while the country spiraled seemed worse than the alternative. The woman continued.
We need a public response, something that demonstrates stability and continuity. The media is calling this a crisis of confidence.
It is a crisis.
The voice came from a man 3 seats down from Hawks. Older, scarred jaw. Top 20 ranking before injuries forced him into administrative work.
Calling it something softer doesn't change what the people saw. They watched our strongest get dismantled. Words won't fix that.
The commission representative's expression didn't shift.
Which is why we need action. Visible, immediate, reassuring.
She tapped her tablet. The screen changed, displaying Hawk's official photo alongside crime statistics.
Hawks, number 2, young, capable, media-friendly. You've already proven yourself in the field. The public knows your face.
Hawks kept his expression neutral. He'd known this was coming the moment he walked into the building.
You want me to smile for cameras and tell everyone everything's fine?
We want you to provide stability during transition. Endeavor will recover, but until then...
Until then, I'm the placeholder.
Silence settled across the table. Several heroes shifted in their seats. Nobody contradicted him. The commission representative adjusted her glasses.
You would be the face of continuity, a bridge between what was and what comes next.
And if another high end shows up while I'm busy being a symbol, what then?
No answer. They both knew the truth. Hood had been testing them, and they'd failed the test. If it returned, or if others like it appeared, Hawks alone wouldn't be enough. Everyone in this room understood that calculus. Hawks leaned back in his chair, wings shifting slightly.
I'll do the press conferences. I'll smile and wave and say the right things, but we all need to be clear about what I am and what I'm not.
He looked around the table, meeting eyes that quickly glanced away.
I'm not All Might. I'm not even Endeavor. I'm a fast kid with sharp feathers who's very good at cleaning up messes. If you're asking me to pretend otherwise, that's a lie I can sell for maybe 2 weeks before reality catches up.
The commission representative's jaw tightened, but she nodded.
2 weeks may be all we need. Time to reorganize, strategize, demonstrate strength through coordination.
Right, coordination.
Hawks didn't believe it. Neither did she. But they were both professionals, and professionals dealt in necessary fictions. The meeting continued for another hour. Patrol schedules, resource allocation, public messaging, all the machinery of crisis management grinding forward because stopping meant acknowledging how badly they were losing. When it finally ended, Hawks left through a side exit, avoiding the main lobby where reporters had already begun to gather. His phone vibrated constantly. Messages from his agency, interview requests, people wanting reassurance he couldn't honestly provide. He ignored them all and headed for UA, high school. The campus was quiet at this hour. Classes wouldn't start for another 3 hours. Security waved him through after a brief check. Hawks had clearance. He was one of the trusted ones, which meant he got to see exactly how fragile that trust had become. Nezu's office was on the top floor of the administrative building. Small, organized to the point of sterility. The principal sat behind his desk, tablet in hand, surrounded by screens displaying news feeds from across the country.
Rough night.
Nezu glanced up, expression unreadable.
The commission wants me playing Symbol. You watching the collapse in real time. Guess we're both having fun.
Nezu set down his tablet.
They're frightened. Fear makes people reach for familiar patterns even when those patterns have already failed. So what's the unfamiliar pattern? Because I'm fresh out of ideas that don't involve lying to an entire country.
Nezu was quiet for a moment, eyes distant.
The problem isn't strength. Japan has strong individuals. The problem is faith. People need to believe tomorrow will arrive safely. All Might provided that. Endeavor was meant to continue it. Now there's nothing. There's me, apparently. You're capable, but you're not a pillar. You're a support beam at best, and asking a support beam to hold up the entire structure.
He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Hawks moved to the window looking out over the campus. Somewhere below, students were sleeping, unaware that the adults tasked with protecting them were quietly panicking.
So what do we do? Wait for another All Might to show up, train one from scratch that takes decades we don't have.
Nezu's paws drummed against the desk, a nervous habit Hawks had never seen before.
We consider alternatives, options outside normal parameters. Like what? I don't know yet, but I know this: if the system cannot produce what society needs, then perhaps we must accept something the system didn't create.
Hawks turned from the window.
That's dangerously vague. Intentionally so. Some ideas need room to breathe before they're spoken aloud.
Nezu returned his attention to the screens, ending the conversation without explicitly dismissing Hawks. The winged pro took the hint and headed for the door.
Hawks.
He paused.
When you do those press conferences, don't lie. They'll sense it. Be honest about uncertainty while projecting confidence in process. It's a narrow line, but you're capable of walking it. And if the process fails, then we'll all fail together. At least we'll have company.
Hawks left UA as dawn broke across Tokyo. The city looked normal from the air. Traffic beginning its morning crawl. Lights in windows, people starting their day. All of it running on momentum and habit, not realizing the foundation had already cracked. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered.
Yeah.
First press conference is in 4 hours. We've prepared talking points. Don't deviate.
Wouldn't dream of it.
He ended the call and flew higher above the buildings, above the pretense. Up here, the illusion of normalcy fell away. Up here, he could see the city for what it was, a system running on fumes, one shock away from collapse. In a hospital in Kyushu, Enji Todoroki woke to machines beeping and pain radiating through his entire body. The memories came back slowly. Hood. The fight. the loss. He tried to sit up and failed. His body wouldn't respond properly. Something was very wrong. A doctor entered, saw him awake, and called for nurses. They descended with efficient concern, checking vitals, adjusting medications, asking questions. Endeavor couldn't focus on because one truth kept overwhelming everything else. He'd failed. Publicly, completely, and everyone had watched.
How long until I can leave?
The doctor hesitated.
Mr. Todoroki, you sustained severe trauma. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, tissue damage from extreme heat exposure. You'll need extensive physical therapy before.
How long?
The doctor's expression shifted to something between pity and professional distance.
Optimistically, 3 months before you can walk without assistance. 6 before you're cleared for any combat activity. That's if recovery goes perfectly.
6 months. Half a year before he could even attempt to reclaim the position he'd held for 3 days. Endeavor's working eye focused on the ceiling tiles, counting them, because it was easier than processing the timeline he'd just been given. The doctor left. The nurses followed. Endeavor lay alone in the quiet room listening to machines track functions his body was handling on autopilot. Outside, Japan needed a symbol. Inside that symbol, couldn't even stand. His phone sat on the bedside table. His family hadn't called yet. They would eventually. Shoto would come out of obligation. Natsuo out of something between concern and old anger. His daughter would bring flowers she thought he'd like, and small talk that would hurt worse than the injuries. He didn't reach for the phone. Across the city in scattered locations, small anomalies accumulated in police databases. A convenience store clerk reported 3 men unconscious near UA. No clear cause. A traffic camera glitched for exactly 4 seconds, then resumed normal function. A seismograph registered a pressure wave that didn't match any known signature. Individually meaningless, data noise. The kind of irregularities that happened in any major city on any given day. But Nezu, watching feeds from his office at 3 a.m, saw patterns others would dismiss. He flagged the reports, cross-referenced timestamps, noted geographic clustering. Something had moved through Tokyo's eastern districts. Something that left traces too subtle for standard monitoring, but too consistent to be random. He made a note to investigate personally once the commission meetings ended. Some anomalies required direct observation rather than remote analysis. The screen flickered. Another report. Minor seismic activity near the UA perimeter. Probably nothing. Nezu saved it anyway. In the commission headquarters, strategy sessions continued. In UA, students slept unaware. In hospitals and agencies and government offices. People worked through exhaustion because stopping meant confronting how little control they actually had. Japan ran on routine and the desperate hope that routine would be enough. It wouldn't be. But they'd discover that soon enough. They were all too busy trying to hold together what had already shattered. The report came through at dawn. 3 suspected villains unconscious near the eastern perimeter of UA's campus. No injuries, no property damage beyond cracked pavement. No witnesses except a convenience store clerk who'd called it in after finding the bodies. Nezu read the file twice. The details didn't add up. All 3 suspects had registered quirks: hardening, flame emission, enhanced speed. The kind of abilities that made them confident enough to operate in hero-dense districts. Not amateurs, not careless. The police had already taken them into custody. Standard procedure. But the preliminary report included something that made Nezu forward the file to Izayoi before the sun finished rising. Quirk activation residue detected at the scene. Metallic skin cells, trace heat signatures, acceleration marks on pavement. All 3 had tried to use their abilities. All 3 had been disabled anyway. Impact patterns consistent with strikes delivered faster than defensive quirks could respond. The one with hardening still had his skin transformed to metal when they found him. It hadn't mattered. Just force, precise, overwhelming. Applied before enhanced durability or speed could make a difference. Aizawa arrived at Nezu's office 20 minutes later, hair tied back, capture weapon wrapped loosely around his shoulders. He looked like he'd been awake for hours despite the early call. Probably had been. Sleep came irregularly to people who spent their careers expecting ambush.
You read it.
Nezu nodded toward the screen.
3 times. Either they attacked each other, which makes no tactical sense, or something else was involved. Something we didn't detect. Something that left no signature we recognize.
Aizawa moved to the window looking out over the campus. Students would be waking soon. Classes would begin. Routine would continue because routine was all they had left.
Could be a new quirk type. Unknown factor. Happens more than people think. Could be, or could be connected to the anomaly from yesterday.
Aizawa turned.
What anomaly?
Nezu pulled up a different file. Security footage from a street camera 2 blocks from campus. Timestamp 14 hours ago. The video showed a figure walking into frame, pausing, then continuing out of sight. Nothing remarkable except for one detail. Every electronic device within a 3-meter radius had experienced brief interference. Not damage, just static. As if something about the figure's presence didn't quite mesh with the surrounding technology.
That's not much to go on. No, but combined with unconscious criminals and impact patterns that suggest precision rather than rage, it forms a picture. Of what? Something we should investigate directly.
Aizawa's eyes narrowed.
You want to go to the scene yourself. I want to understand what happened before assumptions solidify into facts, and I'd prefer company.
They took an unmarked vehicle. No sirens, no announcement. Nezu had learned early that some investigations required discretion more than authority. If this turned out to be nothing, no harm, and quiet curiosity. If it turned out to be something better, to understand it before declaring it publicly. The eastern perimeter bordered a mixed commercial district. Apartments above storefronts, early morning foot traffic. The kind of neighborhood where people minded their business, because interfering meant complications nobody wanted. The pavement still showed the impact marks. 3 separate locations, each one surrounded by police tape that local pedestrians ignored with practiced ease. Aizawa crouched near the largest crater, running fingers along the edge.
Single strike, downward angle. Whoever did this knew exactly how much force to use. Not excessive, perfectly calibrated. Enough to disable, not enough to kill. That takes either extensive training or instinctive control.
Nezu examined the other 2 sites. Similar patterns. Different angles of approach, but identical precision. One showed scorch marks where flame emission had activated too late. Another had acceleration grooves that ended abruptly, as if the speedster had been intercepted mid-movement. Whoever had done this hadn't just been fighting. They'd been ending situations before quirks could become factors. A teenager walked past, headphones around his neck, hands in pockets, blonde hair catching the morning light. He glanced at the taped-off areas with mild interest, the way people look at construction sites or street performers. Acknowledged, but not engaged. Then he kept walking. Nezu watched him go. Something about the movement pattern felt familiar. Not threatening, just displaced. Like watching someone navigate a room in the dark, compensating for furniture they couldn't see, but somehow knew was there.
Principal.
Nezu blinked.
Nothing. I thought I recognized someone.
Aizawa followed his gaze, but the teenager had already turned a corner, disappearing into the flow of morning commuters. They continued the investigation. Interviewed the convenience store clerk, who remembered nothing useful except that the 3 suspects had been running before they'd been stopped. Running from what he couldn't say, just running. Nezu's phone buzzed. A priority message from campus security. Minor incident near the western gate. Single individual attempting unauthorized entry. Low-level threat, already contained.
We should head back.
Izawa was already moving toward the vehicle. The western gate was rarely used except by delivery services and maintenance crews. Security there consisted of automated scanners and a single guard whose primary job was checking credentials, not equipped for actual combat situations. They arrived to find the guard sitting on a bench looking confused but unharmed. A figure lay unconscious near the gate itself, sprawled in a position that suggested he'd been dropped rather than fallen. Debris floated in the air around him. Small rocks, a metal pipe, a discarded bottle. All suspended 3 feet off the ground, trembling as their controller's concentration had been violently interrupted. Telekinesis. The registration database would confirm it later, but the evidence was obvious. This one had tried to use his quirk actively. The objects were still hovering when Nezu and Izawa arrived, slowly beginning to fall as the unconscious villain's brain stopped maintaining the effect. And standing nearby, looking at the UA campus with the detached interest of someone evaluating a tourist attraction, was the same blonde teenager from earlier. Nezu approached carefully, not cautiously, careful. There was a difference. Caution implied fear. Care implied respect for variables not yet understood.
Excuse me.
The teenager turned. Purple eyes met Nezu's without surprise or concern. Just mild acknowledgement that someone had spoken.
You're the principal here.
Nezu's whiskers twitched.
I am, and you are lost.
The answer came without hesitation or elaboration. Just a statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested getting lost was mildly inconvenient, but not particularly distressing. Izawa moved closer, eyes already glowing red as erasure activated. The teenager glanced at him, noted the effect, and looked away again, as if dismissing something irrelevant. The casual dismissal triggered immediate recognition in Izawa's trained instincts. He'd encountered quirk-nullifying villains before. People whose abilities operated outside standard biological channels. But this was different. Erasure targeted the quirk factor in genetics. If there was no factor to suppress the ability, simply found nothing to erase. This teenager had no quirk factor at all. And yet, he'd just disabled a telekinesis user mid-activation.
That man attempted to enter campus without authorization. Did you see what happened? He tried to grab me. I stopped him. How?
The teenager tilted his head slightly, considering the question. Around them, the last of the suspended objects clattered to the ground as the telekinesis effect finally dissipated completely.
Does it matter? He's not moving anymore.
Izawa's eyes narrowed. The villain had activated his quirk. That much was obvious from the debris field. Telekinesis users didn't go down easy. They fought from a distance, manipulated the environment, created barriers. This one had tried all of that, and failed before any of it made a difference. Izawa's erasure held steady red eyes fixed on the figure, who showed no reaction to having his quirk suppressed, because there was nothing to suppress, no energy signature, no biological marker, nothing that Izawa's ability could recognize or target. Nezu noticed. Of course he noticed. And he noticed that Izawa noticed, watching the subtle shift in the underground hero's posture from alert to deeply unsettled.
I'm going to ask you to come with us, inside, just for a conversation.
The teenager looked at the campus again. Tall buildings, training facilities, the infrastructure of a society built around exceptional abilities. His expression suggested he was comparing it to something else and finding it smaller than expected.
This isn't Little Garden.
The name meant nothing to Nezu. A location, a code phrase. Some reference he lacked context to interpret. But the tone carried certainty. This person knew exactly where they were supposed to be, and this wasn't it.
No, this is Yuo High School, Japan, and you are confused about why I woke up here instead of there?
Not evasive, not hiding, just genuinely more interested in the dislocation than in the people questioning him. Nezu made a decision based on instinct, refined through decades of reading situations that defied easy categorization.
Would you like coffee while we sort this out?
The teenager's expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile. Just acknowledgement that the offer was reasonable.
Sure.
They walked onto campus, the three of them forming an odd procession. Nezu in front, conversational and calm. The teenager in the middle, hands in pockets, looking around with the casual attention of someone window shopping. Aizawa behind erasure, still active, despite growing certainty that it was doing nothing at all. Students were beginning to emerge from dormitories. Classes didn't start for another hour, but the campus woke early out of habit and competitive instinct. A few noticed the group, most ignored it. Nezu escorting visitors wasn't uncommon enough to generate gossip. They reached the administrative building without incident. Nezu's office. The same space where he'd met Hawks hours earlier, where he'd spent the night analyzing collapse patterns in social confidence. The teenager sat in the chair across from Nezu's desk without being asked. Not aggressive, not challenging authority, just someone who saw a chair and took it because standing seemed inefficient. Aizawa remained near the door, erasure finally deactivating. His eyes stayed normal, but his posture radiated the controlled tension of someone ready to move if variables shifted unexpectedly. Nezu poured coffee from a pot that was always somehow fresh, despite the hour. 3 cups. He slid one across the desk, kept one for himself, and offered the third to Aizawa, who shook his head without breaking his surveillance of their guest.
So, Little Garden, is that where you're from? Was, before I fell asleep and woke up in the wrong place. That must be disorienting. It's inconvenient.
The teenager sipped the coffee, made a face that suggested it was barely acceptable, but kept drinking anyway.
Do you have a name? Izayoi. Just Izayoi. Sakamaki, but the first part works.
Nezu filed the information away. A name. Japanese, despite the boy's claim of being from somewhere called Little Garden. Another contradiction in a situation built from them.
Izayoi, then. I'm going to be direct because I suspect you'd prefer that to elaborate courtesy. You disabled 4 people this morning using methods that don't match any known quirk profile. Our campus security tried to analyze you and found nothing to analyze. One of the most capable erasure specialists in the country attempted to suppress your abilities and had no effect whatsoever.
Nezu set down his cup.
So I'll ask plainly, what are you...
Izayoi considered this. Not defensively. Not with the calculation of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. Just weighing whether the question itself was worth the effort of answering.
Someone who got dropped into a world that feels like it's made of paper.
Silence settled over the office. Outside, students laughed on their way to breakfast. Campus life continued unaware that 3 people were sitting in a small room, confronting a reality that didn't fit the established framework of how power and ability functioned. Aizawa spoke for the first time since they'd entered the building.
That thing at the gate, the one who tried to grab you, you could have killed him. Yeah. But you didn't. Didn't need to. He stopped being a problem.
The phrasing was precise. Clinical. Not cruel or boastful. Just someone describing the solution to a minor obstacle. Nezu's mind raced through possibilities. Enhanced human from an unknown location. Extra-dimensional traveler. Quirk so unusual it bypassed standard detection methods. None of the theories quite fit. All of them had gaps that refused to close no matter how he approached the analysis. His phone buzzed. Another message from security. The individual at the western gate had regained consciousness and was claiming he'd been struck by something too fast to see. Demanding police investigation, threatening legal action. Nezu silenced the phone.
You're going to cause complications. I wasn't planning to be here at all. But you are here, which presents interesting problems for both of us.
Izayoi finished the coffee, set the empty cup on the desk with the kind of precision that suggested fine motor control operating at a level most people never achieved.
You're thinking about whether I'm dangerous. I'm thinking about whether you're controllable.
The teenager's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Not threatening, not aggressive. Just a subtle reminder that control was a concept with limited applicability.
I'm not interested in breaking things here. I'm just trying to figure out where here actually is. Japan, Tokyo area, a world where approximately 80% of the population manifests superhuman abilities called quirks. Does that match your understanding? Sort of. The power feels different though, smaller, more contained.
Aizawa's hand moved toward his capture weapon, then stopped. A reflexive response to a statement that implied the entire foundation of their society was inadequate by comparison to wherever this person came from. Nezu made a choice. Not based on certainty, not based on complete information, based on the recognition that sometimes the correct move was accepting a piece that didn't belong on the board and figuring out its purpose later.
I'm going to propose something unconventional. You stay here temporarily. On campus, we provide accommodation and assistance while you determine how to return to wherever you came from. In exchange, you refrain from publicly demonstrating whatever capabilities you possess. Why would I agree to that? Because the alternative is attention from authorities who won't be as reasonable as I'm being, and because I suspect you're curious about this place despite your dismissive assessment of it.
Izayoi was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged.
Fine, but if this gets boring, I'm leaving. Understood.
Nezu stood extended a paw. Izayoi looked at it, recognized the gesture, and shook it with the minimum pressure required to be polite, without being enthusiastic. Aizawa finally spoke again.
Principal, can I have a word private?
Nezu nodded.
Izayoi, if you'll wait here for a moment.
The teenager settled back into the chair, pulling out headphones and putting them on. Immediate disengagement. No curiosity about what was being discussed. Just patience born from someone accustomed to waiting for interesting things to arrive rather than chasing them. Nezu and Aizawa stepped into the hallway. The door closed. Soundproofed walls meant privacy, but both kept their voices low anyway.
That thing doesn't have a quirk. I know. Erasure had no effect. None. I was targeting him for 2 full minutes, and it was like trying to turn off a shadow. Yes? But he neutralized 4 quirk users. The one at the gate was actively using telekinesis. Objects were floating. The bastard tried to weaponize debris and got shut down before the first rock could fly. I noticed. So what is he?
Nezu looked through the small window in the door. Izayoi sat motionless, eyes closed, listening to music no one else could hear. Completely relaxed in a stranger's office, in a foreign country, in a world that wasn't his.
A variable. Possibly the one we've been looking for without knowing it. That's not an answer. No, but it's accurate.
Aizawa's jaw tightened.
You're taking a massive risk. I'm accepting an opportunity that presented itself at a strategically critical moment. There's a difference. And if he's dangerous...
Nezu's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes carried the calculation of someone who'd survived encounters with beings far more threatening than a displaced teenager.
Then we'll discover that before anyone else does. Better us than the Commission. Better controlled observation than chaotic first contact.
Aizawa didn't argue further. They both knew Nezu was right. Not morally, perhaps. Not ethically by conventional standards. But tactically, strategically in the framework of crisis management and long-term survival. They returned to the office. Izayoi hadn't moved, hadn't snooped, hadn't done anything except sit and listen to music from a device that shouldn't work if he truly had no quirk factor in his biology. Another contradiction. Another gap in understanding. Nezu could work with that.
We'll set you up in one of the guest facilities. Temporary housing for visiting faculty. You'll have privacy and access to campus amenities. We'll need to create basic documentation, but that's manageable. Whatever.
Not gratitude, not enthusiasm. Just acceptance that the arrangement solved an immediate problem. Aizawa escorted Izayoi to the guest quarters, while Nezu returned to his desk and began composing messages he couldn't send through official channels. Hawks needed to know. The commission eventually needed to know. But timing and framing would determine whether this became an asset or a crisis. He pulled up the security footage again. The teenager walking down the street, pausing, moving on. Nothing remarkable to casual observation. But Nezu had learned to see patterns others missed. The way Izayoi moved through space carried the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never encountered an environment they couldn't navigate. No hesitation, no caution. Just certainty that obstacles would move or be moved. That wasn't trained behavior. That was fundamental to identity. Nezu saved the file with a classification level that required his personal authorization to access. Then he opened a blank document and began writing notes that would never enter official records. Outside morning shifted toward afternoon. Students attended classes. Teachers taught. The world continued because the world had no reason to believe anything had changed. But something had. A piece that didn't belong had entered play. And Nezu intended to understand exactly what that meant before anyone else realized the game had shifted. The conference room had no windows. Intentional design. Conversations that happened here needed to remain contained, sealed away from daylight and public scrutiny. 8 people sat around a table that could have accommodated 20. Empty chairs emphasized how few were trusted with this particular discussion. Nezu stood at the head tablet in hand. Behind him a screen displayed data that amounted to more questions than answers. Biological scans showing normal human physiology. Energy readings returning null values. Combat assessment marked incomplete because standard testing protocols had proven inadequate. A woman in commission uniform spoke first. Her name didn't matter. Her position did. She represented oversight authorization and the institutional weight of a government trying not to collapse.
Walk us through it again, from the beginning.
Nezu tapped his tablet. The screen changed to security footage from the western gate. Izayoi standing hands in pockets. A man lunging. Then the man on the ground unconscious, without visible contact between them.
Subject appears human. Late teens. No identification. Claims displacement from a location called Little Garden, which matches no database we've accessed. Displays physical capabilities that exceed known human limits.
He advanced to the next slide. Medical scan results. Blood work. Cellular analysis.
No quirk factor. Erasure has 0 effect. Whatever allows him to function at observed levels operates outside established biological frameworks.
The screen changed to police reports. 4 registered villains, all with documented quirks. Hardening, flame emission, enhanced speed, telekinesis.
All 4 were neutralized within a 3-hour window. The first 3 showed evidence of attempting quirk activation, a metallic skin transformation. Heat signatures, acceleration patterns, none of it mattered. The 4th was actively using telekinesis when disabled. Debris was still suspended when authorities arrived.
Nezu paused, letting that sink in.
Whatever this individual possesses, it doesn't just bypass quirks. It renders them irrelevant to the outcome.
A man across the table leaned forward. Older. Military background evident in posture and the way he assessed information like terrain to be secured or abandoned.
You're telling us you found something that breaks the fundamental rules of how power works in this world, and your recommendation is what exactly?
Nezu's expression remained pleasant.
My recommendation is that we acknowledge reality and adjust strategy accordingly.
That's not an answer.
It's the only honest one available.
Hawks sat near the back wings, folded tight. He'd been summoned 2 hours ago with minimal briefing. Just enough context to understand why everyone in this room looked like they were calculating acceptable losses. The commission representative pulled up a different file. Crime statistics, public confidence indices, incident reports showing escalation across major cities.
We're losing ground daily. Endeavor is hospitalized for months. Every ranking hero below him is stretched past sustainability. The public is frightened, and frightened people make dangerous choices.
She looked directly at Nezu.
You're proposing we address this by introducing an unknown variable with unverifiable background and unquantifiable capabilities, someone who just demonstrated he can ignore active quirk use. Explain why that's preferable to working within existing frameworks.
Because existing frameworks are failing, measurably, publicly, and the deterioration is accelerating. Meanwhile, this individual disabled 4 registered quirk users in hours, including one with tactical-level telekinesis without breaking stride.
Aizawa spoke from his position against the wall, arms crossed.
I've worked with dozens of powerful individuals, trained them, assessed threat levels. This one's different, not just in degree, in kind.
The military consultant straightened.
Different how? He moves through the world like physics is optional, like consequences or suggestions he can decline. I've seen arrogance before. This isn't that. It's certainty, the kind that comes from never encountering resistance that mattered.
Aizawa's expression darkened.
I activated Erasure directly on him. Full effect. 2 minutes of sustained nullification. He didn't even blink. Then I watched security footage of him shutting down a telekinesis user who had objects already floating. The villain tried to weaponize debris. The kid walked through it like walking through smoke.
Silence settled over the room. Someone coughed. Papers rustled. Small sounds amplified by the weight of decisions that couldn't be delayed much longer. Hawks finally spoke.
So we're actually considering this. Making some random kid the face of stability when we don't know where he came from or what he wants. A kid who just proved most offensive quirks are worthless against him. Not the face, the foundation. There's a distinction.
The commission representative's tone carried the flat pragmatism of someone who'd already run the numbers and hated every conclusion.
If we position him correctly, he doesn't need to be visible. Just effective. A demonstration that threats can be neutralized quickly and completely.
And when someone asks questions, when media starts digging into background that doesn't exist.
We classify everything under national security protocols. Create documentation sufficient to satisfy surface inquiry. Most people don't actually want the truth. They want reassurance.
Hawks's jaw tightened.
You're talking about building a lie.
I'm talking about managing information during crisis conditions. Call it what you want. The alternative is watching society fragment while we maintain ethical purity.
The military consultant tapped the table.
What about control? If this individual decides our interests don't align with his, what countermeasures exist?
Nezu's whiskers twitched.
Realistically, none that I am confident would succeed. Erasure doesn't work. Physical restraints assume he'd allow himself to be restrained. And any quirk-based countermeasure becomes irrelevant based on demonstrated performance. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be accurate. He walked through active telekinesis. That's a quirk that manipulates physics at range. It had no more effect than throwing tissue paper at a tank.
Another commission official, younger, less weathered by compromise, raised a hand hesitantly.
Has anyone considered that this might be a test, that whoever sent him here is watching how we respond?
The room went quiet. Nobody had good answers to hypotheticals that expanded the problem beyond already unmanageable boundaries. Nezu closed his tablet.
I've considered every scenario I can construct with available information. Some lead to stability, some to disaster. All of them require making choices without certainty. That's leadership during collapse.
He looked around the table, meeting eyes that wanted to look away.
The question isn't whether this is dangerous. Everything is dangerous now. The question is whether controlled danger is preferable to uncontrolled deterioration.
The commission representative stood.
We'll need operational parameters, documentation protocols, A handler to maintain day-to-day contact and report anomalies.
Her eyes shifted to Hawks.
You're number 2. You have public trust, and you're already cleared for sensitive operations. This assignment is yours.
Hawks didn't move.
I wasn't aware I'd volunteered.
You didn't, but you're capable, available, and expendable. If worst-case scenarios materialize, that makes you ideal.
The bluntness was almost refreshing. No pretense about teamwork or honor. Just cold calculation delivered without apology. Hawks exhaled slowly.
What exactly does handler mean in this context?
Monitor his activities, facilitate integration without exposure, manage fallout if he makes mistakes, be ready to respond if he becomes a threat instead of an asset.
Respond how?
She didn't answer. Didn't need to. They both understood that some responses couldn't be discussed in rooms where recordings might exist. Hawks looked at Nezu.
And you're okay with this? I'm accepting reality. Whether I'm okay with it is irrelevant to its necessity.
The meeting continued for another hour. Legal frameworks, classification levels, communication chains, all the infrastructure of institutional decision-making applied to a situation that defied every assumption those institutions were built on. When it finally ended, people filed out with the exhausted relief of having passed responsibility upward or sideways. Nobody left happy. Several left looking ill. Hawks remained seated. Aizawa hadn't moved from his position against the wall. Nezu gathered his materials with the methodical care of someone already thinking 3 moves ahead.
You really think this works?
Nezu paused.
I think traditional approaches have exhausted their utility. This at least offers variables our opponents haven't accounted for. That's not the same as working. No, but it's better than the certainty of continued failure.
Aizawa pushed off from the wall.
What happens when he gets bored? You heard how he talks. This whole world is a curiosity to him. Curiosity fades. Then we make sure it doesn't fade before we've stabilized enough to survive his departure.
Hawk stood, wings shifting restlessly.
I'm supposed to babysit someone who could probably turn me into paste without noticing he'd done it, and somehow convince him that playing along is worth his time. Essentially, yes. Great, love this job, really feeling that number 2 pride.
Nezu's expression softened slightly.
I wouldn't assign this to you if I didn't believe you capable of handling it. You have skills beyond combat. Use them.
Hawks left without responding. The hallway outside was empty. Most commission staff had gone home hours ago. He walked toward the exit, mind racing through scenarios that all ended with him standing in front of cameras explaining something unexplainable. His phone buzzed. Instructions already coming through. Meeting location, time, security protocols. The machine was already moving, adjusting to incorporate a piece that didn't fit any existing slot. He answered without checking who was calling.
Hawks.
Guest quarters building 7. Tomorrow morning. Brief introduction. Keep it casual.
Casual introduction to an interdimensional teenager who can bench press buildings. Sure, I'll bring coffee.
Your sarcasm is noted and disregarded. This is happening. Your job is making it happen smoothly.
The line went dead. Hawks stood in the parking structure looking at his reflection in a car window. Number 2. Hero. Symbol of competence and friendly efficiency. Now responsible for managing someone who made the entire ranking system look like a children's game. He spread his wings and launched into the night sky. Flying helped. Being alone with thoughts and wind, and the city spread below like a circuit board of lights and shadows. Somewhere down there, Izayoi was probably sleeping, or listening to music, or doing whatever someone did when they'd been dropped into a world that felt inadequate. And tomorrow, Hawks would smile and pretend this was all routine. Because that's what handlers did. They made the impossible look manageable until it either worked or exploded. He just hoped he'd recognize which one was happening before it was too late. In his office, Nezu compiled documentation that would create a legal fiction around Izayoi Sakamaki. Born where classified. Previous residence classified. Power source under investigation by authorities who required security clearance to discuss findings. All technically true, all completely misleading. He signed authorization forms with the quiet awareness that he was betting civilization stability on a 17-year-old who'd expressed zero interest in being a symbol of anything. The math was simple. Risk of using Izayoi versus risk of not using him. Both calculations led to disaster. One just had a narrower path through the rubble. Nezu chose the path and hoped competence could substitute for confidence. In the guest quarters, Izayoi lay on a bed that was comfortable enough to be acceptable. Headphones on, eyes closed. Thinking about Little Garden and whether anyone there had noticed his absence yet. Probably not. Time worked strangely between worlds. He could be gone for months here and return to find only minutes had passed there, or vice versa. The mechanics were inconsistent. He'd agreed to stay because Nezu had offered something interesting. The possibility that this world, despite feeling fragile, might produce a challenge worth his attention. So far, nothing had qualified. But the principal's eyes had carried calculation that suggested surprises were being prepared. Izayoi could wait. He was good at waiting. Patience came easily when you knew eventual boredom would drive the world to entertain you, whether it wanted to or not. Across the city and hospital beds and government offices and homes where people tried to sleep despite fear, Japan held its breath without knowing why. Something had shifted. Not visibly. Not yet. But the air carried the electric taste of pressure building before storms. And in rooms where decisions were made, in darkness, people who'd never met Izayoi Sakamaki had just chosen to place the country's fate in his hands. They told themselves it was strategy. It was desperation dressed in professional language. And everyone involved knew it, except the one person who actually mattered. He was too busy being bored to care. The briefing room was larger this time. More chairs, more faces. Word had spread through carefully controlled channels that something required expert analysis. Not the full truth. Just enough to summon the right people without triggering broader alarm. 14 specialists sat around tables arranged in a U-shape. Quirk theorists, tactical analysts, legal advisors, people who spent careers quantifying the extraordinary and fitting it into frameworks society could accept. Nezu stood at the center tablet, synced to screens, showing data that had been scrubbed of identifying details, but left enough substance to permit evaluation. Behind him, Hawks leaned against the wall wings, folded tight. Not speaking. Just observing with the careful attention of someone assigned to clean up messes before they became disasters. A woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back severely, raised her hand. Dr. Tanaka, lead researcher at the National Quirk Registry. Her work had classified thousands of abilities into taxonomies that made superhuman powers feel manageable.
You're asking us to assess threat levels for an individual with no registered quirk factor who neutralized 4 documented ability users, including one actively employing psychokinetic manipulation.
That's correct.
And you verified the targets weren't suppressed by environmental factors, quirk canceling technology, external interference.
Verified. One subject maintained active transformation throughout the encounter. Metal density skin remained manifested post-incapacitation. The psychokinetic had objects suspended at moment of neutralization.
Tanaka frowned at her own notes.
That shouldn't be possible. Hardening type quirks create physical buffers specifically designed to absorb kinetic energy. If transformation was active, standard force application should have been mitigated or deflected entirely.
Should have been, wasn't.
A younger man, military posture, spoke from the back.
What about the speed type enhanced velocity creates evasive advantages? Even if interception occurred, there should be evidence of pursuit or angle adjustment. Subject was disabled mid-acceleration, no pursuit, single point impact.
The room went quiet. People shuffled papers, recalculated equations that suddenly produced wrong answers. A legal advisor, thin-faced and perpetually worried, cleared his throat.
Assuming these assessments are accurate, we're discussing an individual who operates outside known physical parameters. What classification framework applies?
Nezu tapped his tablet. The screen changed to a proposed designation.
Anomalous non-quark phenomenon, abbreviated ANQP, a category that acknowledges superhuman capability without requiring biological quirk markers.
That's not a real classification.
It is now, or it will be once this council validates the framework.
Tanaka stood moving closer to the screen.
You're creating new taxonomy to accommodate one individual. That sets precedent. Once ANQP exists as classification, others will claim it. We'll have requests for reclassification from people whose quirks don't fit standard models.
Good. Our models clearly have gaps.
Hawks finally spoke voice, cutting through the theoretical debate.
Can we focus on what matters? This person exists. They're here. Classification doesn't change capability. The question is whether capability solves our immediate crisis.
A tactical analyst, scarred hands suggesting field experience, gestured at the data.
You're talking about deployment, using an unknown factor in active situations. I'm talking about acknowledging reality. Endeavor is hospitalized. Crime rates are up 40%. Public confidence is collapsing. Meanwhile, someone just demonstrated they can neutralize quirk users faster than those users can leverage their abilities.
The analyst's jaw tightened.
And if this individual decides our objectives don't align with theirs, then we have the same problem we'd have anyway, except worse, because we wasted time pretending options existed that don't.
Uncomfortable silence settled. Nobody wanted to say what everyone understood. Desperation had narrowed choices to acceptance or collapse. Nezu advanced to another slide. Documentation templates. Authorization structures. The bureaucratic scaffolding required to transform an impossibility into policy.
The proposal is conditional legitimization. This individual receives provisional recognition as an asset under Hero Public Safety Commission oversight. Activities are monitored, public exposure is controlled, documentation remains classified pending stability assessment.
The legal advisor leaned forward.
You're describing a weapon, not a symbol. I'm describing a tool. How it's characterized publicly is a separate discussion.
Not that separate. If word gets out we're hiding a quirkless individual in a hero framework, the backlash will be catastrophic.
Which is why the classification specifically avoids that terminology. ANQP doesn't mean quirkless, it means power source unidentified by current methodology.
Tanaka returned to her seat, expression troubled.
You're playing semantic games with public perception.
I'm preserving social stability while addressing an existential threat. Call it what you want, the function remains necessary.
Discussion continued for another hour. Technical objections, ethical concerns, procedural questions about oversight and accountability. All valid. None sufficient to change the underlying equation. Hawks watched people argue themselves into acceptance. Saw the moment each specialist realized they were being asked to rubber stamp a decision already made. Some resented it. Some looked relieved. Nobody walked out. When it finally concluded, documentation was distributed for signature. 14 experts authorizing a framework they'd just spent hours questioning. But signatures appeared anyway because the alternative was admitting they had nothing better to offer. The room emptied slowly. Hushed conversations in hallways. People processing what they'd just legitimized. Hawks remained behind with Nezu.
Think they'll actually keep quiet? For now. Fear is a powerful motivator, and everyone in that room understands what happens if this leaks prematurely. And when it leaks anyway, because it will. Something this big doesn't stay contained.
Nezu closed his tablet.
Then we'll already have results to point to. Success quiets criticism more effectively than secrecy.
Hawks pushed off from the wall wings, rustling.
You're betting everything on a kid who doesn't care about any of this. I'm betting on outcomes. His motivations are irrelevant if results align with our needs. That's cold. That's accurate.
In the guest quarters, Izayoi sat on a bed that was acceptable, but unmemorable. Headphones on, eyes closed, music from Little Garden playing through a device that shouldn't work in this world, but did anyway, because rules here felt optional. A knock interrupted the third repetition of a track he'd been using to measure time passage. He pulled off the headphones.
Yeah.
The door opened. Nezu entered alone this time. No Aizawa, no guards, just the small principal carrying a folder that looked absurdly oversized in his paws.
I hope I'm not interrupting. You are, but I was bored anyway.
Nezu sat in the room's single chair.
I wanted to discuss your situation directly, without intermediaries or diplomatic phrasing. Finally, everyone else talks like they're reading from a script. Professional necessity, but yes, exhausting.
Nezu set the folder on the desk, then paused. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from formal to something more direct.
You're from somewhere else. Little Garden, you called it, which means you have no context for what's happening here, no understanding of why everyone's been so tense. I notice people act like the sky's falling, because it is, slowly, visibly.
Nezu pulled up a chair, settling into what was clearly going to be a longer explanation.
This society functions on a simple premise that heroes exist to protect ordinary people from those who would harm them. For decades, one man embodied that promise so completely that his mere existence deterred most threats. We called him the symbol of peace. Past tense. Past tense. He retired recently, not by choice. His body gave out after a final battle that saved thousands but cost him everything he had left.
Izayoi listened without particular emotion, just processing information the way someone might review a weather report.
When he stepped down, we needed a replacement. Someone who could stand in that position and convince society that protection still existed. The man who inherited the title was called Endeavor. Strong, experienced, second-ranked for years. Let me guess, he failed. Spectacularly. 3 days into his tenure as number 1, he was defeated by something called a high-end Nomu, a manufactured creature designed specifically to kill heroes. The fight was broadcast live. The entire country watched our new symbol get broken.
Nezu's paws tapped against the armrest, a rare display of agitation.
Since then, crime has increased 43%. Public confidence has collapsed. And the organization responsible for creating that Nomu, they're called the League of Villains, led by someone named Tamura Shigaraki. They want to destroy Hero Society entirely. Not reform it, not replace it. Destroy it. Why? Ideology. Revenge. A fundamental belief that the current system is rotten and deserves to burn. The specifics matter less than the result. They have resources, strategy, and apparently the ability to manufacture threats our best heroes can't handle.
Izayoi tilted his head slightly.
So you're losing. We're losing ground. We're losing time. And most importantly, we're losing the one thing that kept this society stable, the belief that someone stands between ordinary people and chaos.
Nezu leaned forward.
That's where you come in. You've been here 3 days. In that time, you've demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything we can adequately explain. You've also been remarkably cooperative, despite having no obligation to be. I'm waiting to see if anything interesting happens. And has it? Not yet, but the way people are scrambling suggests something might.
Nezu's whiskers twitched the closest he came to a smile.
We're considering offering you a role. Not as a hero in the traditional sense. As something else. A contingency. Someone who stands ready when conventional approaches fail.
He paused, then added with unusual candor.
I'm not asking you to replace the symbol of peace. That position requires someone who inspires hope, who speaks to crowds, who represents ideals. You're none of those things, and I wouldn't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. Good, because I'd walk out if you tried. What I am asking is simpler. Be the thing that stops threats like the one that broke Endeavor. The League of Villains is testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses, When they deploy something that exceeds our capacity to respond, I need someone who can end it before it becomes catastrophic. Sounds like you want a weapon you can point at problems. I want someone capable of solving problems conventional weapons can't address. Whether that makes you a weapon depends on perspective.
Izayoi leaned back against the wall.
What's in it for me? Accommodation, resources, and access to situations that might prove less boring than waiting in a guest room. You're offering me a job fighting things. I'm offering you opportunities to encounter challenges worthy of your attention.
The phrasing was deliberate. Nezu understood this wasn't someone motivated by duty or justice, only by the possibility that something in this world might actually require effort. Izayoi considered for a moment.
If I agree, I'm not pretending to care about speeches or public image. I'm not standing on stages telling people tomorrow will be fine. We're not asking you to. Others will handle public-facing elements. Your role is functional, not symbolic. Then what do you call this role?
Nezu chose his words carefully.
Officially special strategic asset under provisional classification. Unofficially insurance policy against existential threats. That's a lot of words for show up and hit things. That is, accuracy requires precision.
Izayoi almost smiled. Almost.
Fine. But if this gets boring, I'm leaving. And if anyone tries to control what I do or don't do, I'll remind them why that's a bad idea. Understood. We're not in the business of controlling you, merely directing your attention toward productive applications.
They shook on it. An agreement between someone betting civilization stability and someone betting on eventual entertainment. Neither particularly worried about the other's motivations, because both understood the transaction clearly. Nezu stood, leaving the folder on the desk.
Documentation. Review it if you're curious. Ignore it if you're not. Either way, someone will brief you tomorrow on preliminary protocols. Protocols meaning rules, guidelines, suggestions, strongly worded recommendations that acknowledge your autonomy while expressing our preferences.
Izayoi picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages, set it back down.
I'll probably ignore most of this. I assumed as much, but it exists for legal purposes.
After Nezu left, Izayoi returned to his music. The folder sat unopened on the desk, containing procedures he wouldn't follow, restrictions he wouldn't acknowledge, and frameworks designed to make the incomprehensible feel manageable. None of it mattered. He'd agreed because staying was marginally more interesting than wandering aimlessly through a world that felt constructed from tissue paper. If they wanted to call that a job, fine, as long as something worth his time eventually showed up. Across Tokyo, in offices and homes and hero agencies, whispers began circulating. Carefully planted, strategically vague, mentions of a new development, someone unusual being brought into consultation, details classified for security reasons. Not lies. Not exactly. Just information shaped to create impressions without providing substance. The Hero Public Safety Commission issued a statement so bland, it raised more questions than it answered. Changes to threat assessment protocols, expanded consultation with external specialists, ongoing review of strategic assets, standard bureaucratic language that meant everything and nothing. But people noticed. Media started asking questions. Heroes exchanged concerned glances at meetings. Somewhere, someone with connections to someone else reported unusual activity at UA. The machine was moving. Not loudly, not obviously, but moving. In a bar in Yokohama, Shigaraki read the commission's statement on a phone screen and laughed once. Short, sharp.
They found something.
The doctor reviewing genetic sequences on a laptop glanced up.
Something or someone. Does it matter? They're scared enough to change protocols, scared enough to classify everything. That means whatever they found isn't fit in their neat little boxes.
He scratched at his neck, that old habit intensifying when patterns emerged.
We hold. Don't deploy anything significant until we know what we're actually facing. The Nomu are ready, we could test. No, they're expecting tests. They're preparing for tests. So we wait. Let them get comfortable. Let them think whatever they found is enough.
The doctor closed his laptop.
And then we remind them that fear doesn't go away just because you found something to hide behind.
In hospitals across Japan, Endeavor lay in recovery, bones knitting slowly, under medical supervision that couldn't accelerate healing beyond natural limits. He stared at ceilings and counted days until mobility returned. Until he could stand without assistance. Until he could prove the failure at Kyushu wasn't the end of his story. Physical therapy hurt more than the injuries. Each session a reminder that his body had limits. The 3 days as number one hadn't prepared him for what that position actually required. Nurses mentioned rumors. Something happening at UA. Changes in commission policy. He listened without responding. What happened in boardrooms didn't matter when you couldn't walk unassisted. Shoto visited once, sat in uncomfortable silence, left without saying much because there wasn't much to say. The distance between them remained measured now in hospital room air rather than training ground tension. Across the city, students at UA noticed increased security. More heroes patrolling perimeters. Meetings happening in buildings students weren't allowed near. Midoriya kept notes. Bakugo growled about secrets. Todoroki watched and waited, analytical instinct suggesting pieces were moving that wouldn't stay hidden much longer. But classes continued. Training proceeded. Routine maintained its momentum because routine was all they had until something shattered it. In his office, Nezu filed reports with classification stamps that ensured limited circulation. Each document, another brick in a structure designed to legitimize the illegitimate through careful application of bureaucratic weight. He felt no satisfaction. This wasn't victory. This was triage. Making the least catastrophic choice available and hoping competence could substitute for certainty. His phone buzzed. Hawks.
It's done. Asset acknowledged. Protocols established. We're committed. Any second thoughts? Too late for those. We crossed the line when we filed the first classification report. Then we move forward. Yeah, forward into whatever this becomes.
The call ended. Nezu looked out his window at a campus full of students training to become heroes in a world that had just decided it needed something else. Something outside their understanding. Something that didn't fit the narratives they'd been taught about power and responsibility. They'd find out, eventually. Everyone would. But for now, the secret held. And in that holding, Japan bought itself time to prepare for a symbol that would never smile for cameras or promise better tomorrows. Just someone who'd show up when conventional answers failed. Whether that was enough remained to be seen. But it was what they had. And sometimes having anything was better than having nothing at all. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. Timing chosen deliberately. Early enough to dominate evening news cycles. Late enough that international outlets would pick it up overnight. Maximum exposure for an announcement nobody fully understood yet. The Hero Public Safety Commission building's main auditorium could hold 300 journalists. 400 showed up. Cameras lined every available space. Reporters checked equipment with the nervous energy of people sensing something significant was about to break. Hawks stood backstage adjusting his jacket for the 5th time. The commission had written talking points. 15 pages of carefully vetted language designed to introduce Izayoi without actually explaining him. He'd read it once, ignored most of it, and prepared to improvise within boundaries he barely understood himself. A commission handler approached tablet in hand.
5 minutes. Remember, emphasize capability, minimize background. If pressed on classification, defer to ongoing security reviews.
Yeah, I got it. Make him sound legitimate without providing actual legitimacy.
That's not how I'd phrase it, but essentially correct.
The handler left. Hawks looked at his reflection in a backstage mirror. Number 2 hero. The face people trusted when they wanted competence without All Might's overwhelming presence. now tasked with selling something he wasn't sure he believed in himself. The door behind him opened. Izayoi walked in hands, in pockets headphones around his neck. He looked at the backstage chaos with the mild interest of someone observing an ant farm.
You ready for this? For what? Standing in front of cameras. For everything that comes after. The questions, the criticism, the fact that half the country's going to hate you before you say a word.
Izayoi shrugged.
They can hate me. Doesn't change anything. Easy to say now, harder when you're actually standing in front of it. I've been hated before. This world's not special.
Hawks wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that media scrutiny here operated with a viciousness Izayoi probably hadn't encountered. But the teenager's expression suggested he genuinely didn't care, and maybe that was the only qualification that mattered.
1 minute.
They walked to the stage entrance. Beyond the curtain, hundreds of voices created a wall of sound. Anticipation, skepticism, hunger for information that would explain why the commission had called an emergency briefing. Hawks stepped out first. Cameras flashed. Questions started immediately overlapping into incomprehensible noise. He raised a hand, waited for relative quiet.
Thank you for coming on short notice. Recent events have required the Hero Public Safety Commission to make strategic adjustments. What I'm about to announce represents an unprecedented response to unprecedented circumstances.
He gestured toward the entrance.
Please welcome our newest strategic asset.
Izayoi walked onto stage. 17 years old. Blonde hair, purple eyes. Completely unremarkable except for the way he moved through space like gravity was negotiable. The room exploded. Questions shouted from every direction. Camera shutters clicked like machine gun fire. Izayoi stood at the podium, looked out at the chaos, and waited. Hawks stepped forward.
His name is Izayoi Sakamaki. He's been undergoing evaluation for the past week and has demonstrated capabilities that meet our highest threat response standards. Due to security protocols, I can't discuss specific classification details, but I can confirm he's been cleared for deployment in crisis situations.
A reporter in front raised her hand, didn't wait to be called.
Where did he come from? What's his background? Why haven't we heard of him before?
Background information remains classified pending ongoing security review. What matters is capability and clearance. Both have been verified. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm authorized to provide.
Another reporter, older, more aggressive.
Is this a replacement for Endeavor? Are you acknowledging the number one hero's failure by bringing in someone unknown?
Hawks's jaw tightened.
Endeavor is recovering from injuries sustained defending civilians. This isn't replacement. This is expansion of available resources during elevated threat levels. But the timing reflects operational necessity. Next question.
A woman near the back stood.
Can we hear from him? Does he have anything to say?
All cameras turned to Izayoi. The teenager looked at Hawks, who nodded slightly. Izayoi stepped to the microphone. The room went silent, waiting, expecting either profound wisdom or catastrophic incompetence.
I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here so you don't have to feel worse.
Pause. Processing. Then chaos.
What does that mean? Are you saying we should be afraid? Is that a threat?
Izayoi looked at the reporters like they were asking questions in a foreign language.
It means I don't care if you trust me. Trust is your problem. Safety is mine.
He walked off stage. Just left. Didn't wait for follow-up questions or attempt to clarify. Hawks stood at the podium, watching a 17-year-old torpedo his own introduction, while somehow making it feel intentional.
That concludes our announcement. Written statements will be distributed shortly.
He left before the shouting could coalesce into actual questions. Backstage, Izayoi was already putting his headphones back on.
You know, you just made my job about 10 times harder, right? Your job is making me look good. My job is managing public perception so we don't all drown in backlash. Sounds exhausting. It is. Especially when you walk off stage like you're bored at a school assembly.
Izayoi tilted his head.
Was I supposed to lie, tell them I'm honored to serve or whatever? You're supposed to not alienate the entire country in 30 seconds. If 30 seconds is all it takes, they weren't gonna like me anyway.
Hawks couldn't argue with that logic. Didn't make it less of a disaster. His phone was already buzzing. Messages from the commission, from his agency, from heroes across the country wanting to know what the hell just happened. He silenced it and headed for the nearest exit. Within an hour, the footage had circulated globally. News networks played Izayoi's statement on loop, dissecting every word. Social media erupted. Opinions split along predictable lines, then fractured into smaller divisions. Some praised the honesty. Finally, someone who didn't pretend heroism was about popularity contests. Most were horrified. This was who they were trusting with public safety. A teenager who openly admitted he didn't care about their feelings. Memes appeared almost immediately. Izayoi's face superimposed over various contexts. Some mocking, some genuinely trying to understand what they just witnessed. Professional analysts offered takes ranging from refreshing candor to dangerous sociopathy. Nobody could agree on whether this was brilliant strategy or catastrophic miscalculation. In a hospital room in Kyushu, Endeavor watched the press conference on a television mounted to the wall. He'd been told about the new asset. Hadn't expected this. The teenager's words echoed in his mind, "Not here to make you feel better. Just here so you don't feel worse." It was possibly the most honest thing Endeavor had ever heard at a hero press conference. It was also going to destroy any chance this kid had of being accepted. His phone rang. Shoto.
You saw it. Everyone saw it. What do you think?
Endeavor watched the replay. Izayoi's expression never changing. No attempt to soften the message or make it palatable.
I think he either knows exactly what he's doing or he doesn't care enough to pretend. And which is worse? I don't know yet.
At UA, students gathered in common rooms, phones out sharing clips and commentary. The press conference had interrupted afternoon classes. Nezu had made an announcement about the new strategic asset, but provided minimal details. Now they were seeing why. Midoriya watched the footage 3 times, taking notes. The body language, the complete lack of performance, the way Izayoi delivered that statement, like reading a weather report.
He's not even trying to be likable.
Bakugo snorted.
Why should he being likable doesn't stop villains? But people won't trust someone who says he doesn't care about them. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he doesn't want trust, just results.
Todoroki said nothing. Just watched the clip again, analyzing something the others hadn't noticed yet. The way Izayoi stood at that podium. No nervousness, no excitement, no indication that 300 cameras mattered at all. Like someone who'd faced much worse and found this entire production mildly tedious. In Yokohama, Shigaraki watched the press conference on a laptop with sound muted. He didn't need audio. The visuals told him everything. The doctor sat nearby, running calculations on genetic sequences that had nothing to do with the current situation, but kept his hands busy.
They're desperate. Look at how the bird tries to control the narrative. How the kid refuses to play along. That's not strategy, that's chaos they're pretending is coordination. Or it's confidence. The kind that comes from actually having something worth being confident about.
Shigaraki's fingers paused mid-scratch.
You think he's real, not just propaganda. I think that they wouldn't risk this much backlash if he wasn't. Bad press is one thing, but they're actively inviting criticism by putting someone this abrasive forward. That suggests the capability justifies the cost.
Shigaraki closed the laptop.
Then we wait longer. No no-mood deployments until we have data, real data, not speculation. The others won't like that. They're eager to test the new landscape. The others can stay eager. I'm not throwing resources at something we don't understand, not when patience costs nothing and mistakes cost everything.
He stood stretching joints that protested from sitting too long.
Find out everything you can about this Izayoi, where he came from, what he's actually capable of, and most importantly, what breaks him. And if nothing breaks him, then we find out what he cares about and break that instead.
Evening news broadcasts led with the press conference. Every network, every channel. The story wasn't about capability or threat response. It was about the boy who told an entire country he didn't care if they liked him. Polling data came back fast. Opinion split almost exactly down the middle. 51% viewed the announcement negatively. 49% reserved judgment or expressed cautious support. But the intensity of both sides was remarkable. People weren't mildly concerned or vaguely hopeful. They were furious or desperate. Nothing in between. The commission released a follow-up statement emphasizing Izayoi's provisional status and ongoing oversight. It did nothing to calm the discourse. If anything, it made things worse by confirming this wasn't a publicity stunt. They were actually serious about this teenager. In his office, Nezu compiled reaction data from multiple sources. Media sentiment, social platforms, internal communications from hero agencies. All of it painting the same picture. Society didn't know what to do with Izayoi. Good. Uncertainty meant attention. Attention meant they'd be watching when he proved himself necessary. His phone rang, a government liaison voice tight with controlled panic.
The Prime Minister's office is requesting clarification. They want to know what our contingency plan is if this individual fails to perform as advertised.
Tell them we're operating under the assumption that failure isn't an option.
That's not a contingency plan.
No, it's an acknowledgement of reality. We've committed. There's no backup. He succeeds or we discover what collapse looks like.
You can't actually believe...
I believe in probability assessment, and probability suggests that if we had had better options, we would have used them. We didn't, so we use what we have.
The call ended abruptly. Nezu didn't take it personally. People liked certainty. They wanted plans with fallbacks and contingencies that created illusions of control. He'd stopped dealing in illusions when Endeavor hit the pavement in Kyushu. In the guest quarters, Izayoi lay on his bed, headphones, on listening to music that had nothing to do with this world or its problems. Outside, thousands of people were arguing about him, analyzing his words, predicting his failure or success. He didn't check social media, didn't watch the news, didn't care about the discourse he'd ignited. They'd asked him to show up and talk. He'd shown up and talked. What they did with that was their concern. A message notification appeared on the phone they'd given him. Hawks asking if he understood the magnitude of what just happened. Izayoi deleted it without responding. Understanding wasn't required, only results. And when the time came for results, words wouldn't matter anyway. The city continued its evening routine. Traffic flowed. Lights turned on in apartment buildings. People cooked dinner and argued about the press conference and wondered if this strange boy would save them or prove to be another disappointment. Nobody knew. Not the commission, not the heroes, not the public they were all pretending to protect. But everyone had committed to finding out. And sometimes commitment was all you had left when certainty had already failed you. 3 days after the press conference, Izayoi stood on the roof of his guest quarters, looking at Tokyo spread below like a circuit board of lights. The city functioned. Traffic moved. People lived their lives. All of it running on momentum and the assumption that tomorrow would arrive safely. It was incredibly boring. He'd spent 72 hours waiting for something interesting to happen. The commission had scheduled briefings. Hawks had tried making conversation. Nezu had provided documentation about threat patterns and villain activity. All useful information that confirmed what Izayoi already suspected. This world's conflicts operated on a scale he found disappointingly small. Nothing here required effort. Nothing tested limits. Nothing justified the anticipation he'd felt when Nezu first mentioned opportunities for challenge. So he'd make his own. Below in Nezu's office, an emergency alert chimed. The principal looked up from reports, analyzing social media sentiment post-announcement. The alert wasn't standard villain activity. It was something else. A broadcast request. Routed through channels that required technical sophistication most criminals lacked. He opened the feed. Izayoi's face appeared on screen. Background showed the Tokyo skyline. Live, current, unauthorized.
If anyone from the League of Villains is watching, I have a message.
Nezu's paws froze on his keyboard.
I'm bored. You're apparently the biggest threat this world has. Prove it. Tomorrow, sunset, Roppongi Hills rooftop. I'll be there. Bring whatever you think can make this interesting.
Pause. Then Izayoi looked directly at the camera.
If you don't show, I'll assume you're not worth the attention, and I'll find something else to do.
The feed cut. Nezu sat in silence for exactly 5 seconds. Then he reached for his phone. Across Tokyo, in a bar that served as temporary headquarters for the League of Villains, Shigaraki watched the broadcast on a laptop screen. Twice. The second time with sound muted, just watching body language and timing. The doctor stood nearby, expression unreadable behind thick glasses.
Well, that's unexpected.
Shigaraki scratched at his neck, fingers moving faster than usual.
He's giving us a target, time, location, everything we need to end this before it starts. Or he's confident we can't. Nobody's that confident. Not when they're 17 and new to hero work.
The doctor pulled up files on a separate screen. Nomu deployment schedules, resource allocation, combat projections based on limited data.
We could deploy Hood's remaining siblings, the full complement, overwhelmed through numbers before he establishes rhythm. How many do we have ready? 11 high-end specimens, not all fully tested but functional.
Shigaraki stood pacing the small room. His mind raced through scenarios. The obvious trap. The less obvious counter-trap. The possibility that this teenager genuinely didn't understand what he was inviting.
This is what they want. Public confrontation. Cameras everywhere. If we show up and lose, we make him legitimate. If we don't show, we look weak. And if we win, then we get one victory and they replace him with someone else. The system doesn't collapse from killing one asset. It adapts.
The doctor closed his laptop.
So we decline. Refuse engagement. Let him stand on that rooftop alone and demonstrate that provocations don't dictate our strategy.
Shigaraki's fingers paused mid-scratch.
No, we respond, but not how he expects. Meaning we don't play his game. We play ours. He wants a confrontation. We give him chaos. Not at his location, not at his time. Somewhere that forces him to choose between looking strong and actually protecting people.
He pulled out his phone, started typing messages to other League members.
Spread attacks across the city. Multiple locations. Low-level operatives not Nomu. Force the hero system to respond. Make them realize having one strong asset doesn't solve distributed threats. And if he still goes to Roppongi, then he proves my point. He's there for himself, not for society. Either way, we win the narrative.
In UA's administrative building, Nezu called an emergency meeting. Hawks arrived first wings, still ruffled from high-speed flight. Aizawa came next, expression suggesting he'd anticipated something like this.
Tell me he didn't actually broadcast a challenge to Japan's most dangerous villain organization. He did, 47 minutes ago. Multiple news outlets have already picked it up.
Hawks dropped into a chair.
Okay. So we shut it down, issue a statement, say it was unauthorized, contain the situation before villains accept the challenge. Too late, they're already planning responses. Before public opinion shifts, it shifted the moment the broadcast went live. We're past containment.
Aizawa leaned against the wall.
Did you know he was going to do this? I suspected he'd active eventually. I didn't anticipate the specific method or timing. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's accurate.
Hawk stood pacing.
This is a disaster. We position him as a strategic asset, and he immediately goes rogue. Challenges villains like he's picking a fight in a schoolyard. Do you understand what this does to credibility? It establishes that he operates on his own terms, which is what we already knew. We're not controlling Izayoi. We're managing the environment around his actions. That's a terrible operational model. It's the only one available.
The door opened. A commission representative entered tablet, already displaying social media feeds. Reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming.
Trending globally within 10 minutes. Half the country thinks he's insane. The other half thinks he's exactly what we need. International response is mixed concern and morbid curiosity.
What about security? Can we even secure Roppongi Hills with less than 24 hours notice?
We're mobilizing every available unit. Perimeter establishment, evacuation protocols, medical staging. It's going to strain resources, but it's manageable.
Manageable if villains actually show up where he said. What if they don't?
Nezu's expression didn't change.
Then we discover whether Izayoi planned for that contingency, or whether he's genuinely just bored and looking for entertainment.
In the guest quarters, Izayoi received 3 messages simultaneously. Hawks asking what he was thinking. Nezu requesting immediate discussion. A commission official demanding he report for briefing. He deleted all 3 and put his headphones back on. The broadcast had been necessary. Waiting for threats to appear organically was inefficient. If this world's conflicts wouldn't come to him, he'd invite them directly. Simple logic. Whether they accepted or declined didn't particularly matter. Either outcome provided information about how the society's power structures actually functioned under pressure. Across the city, hero agencies scrambled to respond. Some deployed assets toward Roppongi preventatively. Others held position assuming distributed attacks. Command structures strained under the weight of coordinating without clear intelligence. Media coverage intensified. Every network led with the story. Analysis filled airtime. Experts debated whether this demonstrated confidence or dangerous instability. Politicians issued carefully worded statements that said nothing while sounding concerned. Public reaction split along predictable lines. Those who'd supported Izayoi saw bold action. Those who'd opposed saw reckless provocation. Neither side changed positions. Both became more entrenched. In a hospital room in Kyushu Endeavor, watched coverage with growing unease. This wasn't how symbols operated. Symbols inspired through presence, not challenges. All Might had never needed to provoke villains. His existence had been provocation enough. This teenager was either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. His phone rang. Shoto again.
He's changing the rules. Rules of how heroes and villains interact, making it personal, direct. All Might fought when villains appeared. This one's inviting confrontation. Is that worse?
Endeavor considered.
I don't know, but it's definitely different. And different means unpredictable. Unpredictable means dangerous. For who? Everyone.
At UA, students gathered despite faculty attempts to maintain normal schedules. The broadcast played on phones passed between desks. Speculation dominated lunch conversations. Training sessions felt hollow compared to what might happen tomorrow. Midoriya filled 3 notebook pages with analysis. Threat assessment, tactical projections, variables that made prediction impossible. Every calculation led back to the same unknown, what Izayoi could actually do when genuinely challenged. Bakugo watched the broadcast once and said nothing. But his hands clenched tighter during afternoon training. Someone was out there taking action while he sat in classrooms, preparing for futures that felt increasingly irrelevant. Todoroki observed his classmates' reactions with detached interest. Fear, excitement, confusion. all of them processing the same realization the world they were training to join had just shifted underneath them. Evening came. Tomorrow approached. The city held its breath without consciously choosing to. In his office, Nezu compiled contingency plans that all relied on assumptions he couldn't verify. Resource deployment, medical preparedness, evacuation routes, all standard protocol for extraordinary circumstances. None of it addressed the core issue they had no control over what happened next. Hawks sat alone in his agency wings, spread across his couch, staring at ceiling tiles and wondering when his job had evolved from damage control to crisis navigation. Tomorrow he'd be there, watching, ready to respond to whatever occurred. But he couldn't shake the feeling that responding was all anyone could do now. Initiative had shifted. Izayoi had claimed it with a 40-second broadcast and a simple challenge. The League of Villains wouldn't ignore it. Couldn't ignore it without appearing weak. But they also couldn't engage directly without risk. So they'd do something else. Something that forced heroes into impossible choices. And Izayoi would respond, however Izayoi responded. The machinery of society continued turning. News cycles, government meetings, public discourse, all of it reacting to a 17-year-old who decided waiting was boring. In the guest quarters, Izayoi set an alarm for tomorrow evening. Then he went to sleep confident that whether villains appeared or not, tomorrow would at least be less tedious than today. Somewhere in the city, Shigaraki finalized plans that didn't involve Roppongi Hills at all. Multiple targets, simultaneous strikes, forced the new symbol to choose between personal glory and actual protection. Let everyone see what happened when heroes cared more about strength than people. Tomorrow would prove something. What exactly nobody knew yet, but everyone had committed to finding out. The city's lights dimmed as midnight passed. Tokyo prepared for whatever came next with the nervous energy of a society that had already lost one symbol and didn't know if it could survive losing another. Morning would bring answers. Or it would bring questions nobody was ready to ask. Either way, the waiting was almost over. Sunset painted Tokyo in shades of orange and red. Roppongi Hills stood empty. Security perimeter established. Cameras positioned. Medical teams on standby. Everything prepared for confrontation at the location Izayoi had specified. Except Izayoi wasn't there. He stood 3 kilometers away on the roof of an apartment building in Shibuya, watching smoke rise from 5 different locations across the city. The League had answered his challenge, just not how he'd expected. Simultaneous attacks, shopping districts, transit hubs, residential areas, not overwhelming force. Calculated chaos designed to spread hero resources thin and force impossible choices. Smart. Annoying but smart. His phone buzzed. Hawks calling for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Izayoi answered.
Where are you? Shibuya, watching. There are 5 active villain incidents across Tokyo, and you're watching. They didn't come to Roppongi, so I came to them.
Silence on the line. Then Hawks's voice carefully controlled.
Which location are you closest to? Transit station 3 blocks east. Why? Because that one has hostages. 17 civilians trapped. Villains with area denial quirks preventing approach. We need...
Izayoi had already started moving.
I'll handle it. Wait, we need to coordinate.
The call ended. 3 blocks at ground level. Izayoi crossed them in 40 seconds, rooftop to rooftop, then dropped into the plaza outside Shibuya Station. Smoke poured from the main entrance. Police had established barriers 200 meters back. Heroes clustered at the perimeter assessing angles. One of them noticed Izayoi approaching. Started to wave him back, then recognition hit.
Where are the hostages? Main terminal, but you can't just...
Izayoi walked past him toward the smoke. Inside the station, 3 villains held positions around 17 civilians huddled near the ticket gates. 2 men, 1 woman. All with quirks that made direct assault complicated. The woman had erected crystalline barriers that reflected kinetic energy. Shoot through them, and bullets ricocheted. Hit them with force, and the impact bounced back doubled. Perfect defense for a hostage situation. 1 man generated toxic gas that filled confined spaces. Not immediately lethal, but debilitating. Heroes couldn't enter without respiratory gear, and the time required to deploy gave villains leverage. The 2nd man had a quirk that destabilized structural integrity. Touch a wall, and it crumbled. Touch a support beam, and the building groaned, threatening to collapse the entire terminal if anyone got too aggressive. They'd chosen their position well. Defenders with area control, maximum civilian risk, minimal approach vectors. Izayoi walked through the entrance. The toxic gas hit him first. Designed to cause respiratory distress, disorientation, loss of motor control. He kept walking, breathing normally. The gas existed. It just didn't matter. The woman with crystal barriers noticed him, activated her quirk. Walls materialized between them, angled to reflect any attack back at the attacker. Izayoi walked through them. The barriers shattered, not from impact, just from contact with something that didn't operate within their physical framework. The structural saboteur touched the nearest pillar. Concrete cracked, threatening collapse that would bury everyone. Izayoi grabbed his wrist before the effect could spread. The villain's quirk activated against Izayoi's grip. Tried to destabilize, found nothing to destabilize. Like trying to corrode something that had no molecular structure to corrode. 3 seconds. That's how long it took to disable all 3 villains and pull the hostages to the plaza outside. He set them down where paramedics could reach them and turned back toward the station.
Is anyone else inside?
The hostages stared at him. 1 woman finally shook her head.
Good.
He left before they could ask questions. Hawks arrived 90 seconds later, feathers deployed, ready for complex tactical extraction. He found 17 freed hostages, 3 unconscious villains being secured by police, and Izayoi already gone. His phone buzzed. Nezu.
Status. Transit station secured. He handled it. I don't even know how, just handled it. And the other 4 locations. Active, heroes engaged, casualties mounting. Where is Izayoi now? Unknown, he doesn't exactly check in.
Across the city in a shopping district in Akihabara. 2 villains with fire manipulation quirks had trapped people in a burning electronics store. Smoke filled the upper floors. Flames spread faster than suppression efforts could contain them. Izayoi appeared on the roof, assessed the situation, then dropped through a skylight directly into the worst of the blaze. Fire surrounded him, temperature high enough to melt steel. The villains had created an inferno specifically designed to kill anyone attempting rescue. He walked through flames like walking through fog. Found the trapped civilians on the 3rd floor, huddled behind makeshift barriers that were seconds from failing. Guided them to an intact stairwell. Then went looking for the villains who'd created this situation. Found them on the ground floor, maintaining the fire, confident their quirks gave them immunity to heat and combustion. They were right. Their quirks did give them immunity. Didn't help when Izayoi arrived. Fire immunity meant nothing against someone who simply ignored the fire entirely and ended the fight with physical force, faster than defensive abilities could activate. By the time firefighters entered the building, all civilians were outside, and both villains were unconscious near the entrance. In Shinjuku, a villain with a duplication quirk had created 30 copies of himself, each one armed and causing havoc across a residential block. Heroes were spread thin, trying to track and contain multiple targets simultaneously. Izayoi found the original in an alley 3 streets from the main chaos. Stopped him. All 30 duplicates vanished simultaneously. Problem solved in under 2 minutes. The pattern repeated across all 5 attack sites. Villains who'd spent days planning coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm hero response found themselves neutralized faster than their backup plans could activate. Not by armies of heroes, not through tactical coordination. Just one teenager moving through Tokyo like physics was optional and quirks were irrelevant. By the time sunset faded to night, all 5 incidents were resolved. 0 civilian casualties, minimal property damage beyond initial attacks. 12 villains in custody, all unconscious, all showing signs of having been stopped so quickly their nervous systems hadn't registered what happened. News footage captured fragments. Izayoi walking through gas that should have incapacitated him. Moving through barriers that should have blocked him. Civilians being rescued from situations heroes were still strategizing how to approach. No dramatic poses, no victory speeches. Just efficiency that made professional heroes look slow. But at the last sight, something changed. Izayoi stood in the cleared plaza outside Shibuya Station, surrounded by cameras that had documented the rescue. Heroes were securing the perimeter. Paramedics tended to free hostages. Normal post-incident protocol. He looked directly at the nearest news camera, spoke without preamble or introduction.
If that's everything you have, stopped wasting my time. I'll wait once more. Next time, don't send trash.
Then he walked away, leaving reporters scrambling to process what they'd just recorded. The statement went viral within minutes. Not inspirational, not reassuring. Just cold dismissal delivered with absolute certainty that whoever was listening would understand the message was meant for them. In the League's temporary headquarters, Shigaraki watched compiled footage from all 5 sites. Played them back, analyzed timing, noted response patterns. Then he watched Izayoi's statement 3 times. The doctors stood nearby running calculations that were producing answers he didn't want to accept.
11 minutes. He resolved 5 coordinated attacks across 3 districts in 11 minutes. Our people had training. Quirks specifically chosen for area denial and hostage leverage. I'm aware he ignored all of it. Gas barriers, structural manipulation, fire duplication, none of it slowed him down.
Shigaraki replayed this final statement. The direct challenge, the casual dismissal.
He's forcing escalation, making us responder look weak. It's a trap, public provocation. If we don't answer, we lose credibility. If we do answer with insufficient force, he makes us look ineffective again. So we answer with overwhelming force. Everything we have that might actually matter.
The doctor pulled up files on remaining Nomu specimens.
The high ends, all of them. How many are combat ready? 15, including the specimens we are saving for later operations. Deploying them all at once empties our strategic reserve.
Shigaraki's fingers moved to his neck, scratching with deliberate slowness.
He called what we sent trash. Fine. Let's show him what happens when we stop testing and start committing. If they fail, then we've confirmed quirk-based combat is obsolete, and we pivot to pure psychological warfare. But we can't pivot until we've actually tried, and we can't try without going all in.
He stood decision made.
Deploy all 15. Public location. Make it a spectacle. If he wants confrontation, we give him something worth his time. And if he wins, at least we'll have forced him to show his full capability. That's a significant gamble. Everything's a gamble now. He made sure of that.
At UA, students gathered around common room televisions, watching footage that was already trending globally. The attacks. The rescues. The complete absence of struggle in any of it. Midoriya's notebook lay forgotten on his lap. His analysis frameworks didn't apply here. Couldn't apply. He'd spent years studying how heroes used quirks strategically, how they covered weaknesses and maximized advantages. Izayoi didn't have weaknesses to cover. Didn't need strategy for advantages, just showed up and ended situations. Bakugo watched the footage once, then left without comment. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from recognition that the gap he'd been trying to close with Deku was nothing compared to the gap between any of them and what they'd just witnessed. Todoroki remained after others filtered away. Rewatched the gas station footage. The moment Izayoi walked through toxic fumes that should have killed him, the complete lack of reaction to environmental hazards that would require specific counter quirks to handle. His father had been #1 for 3 days. This teenager was redefining what power meant. In his hospital room, Endeavor watched the same footage. Physical therapy forgotten. Recovery timeline irrelevant. He'd spent decades becoming strong enough to stand where All Might stood. And now someone had appeared who made that entire journey look quaint. He called Shoto.
You saw. Everyone saw. This is what I was trying to become. This level, this certain, and he has it at 17 without even trying.
Shoto was quiet for a moment.
Does it change anything for you? It changes everything. The whole framework, what strength means, what symbols mean, everything we thought we understood about how this works.
Across Tokyo, citizens emerged from lockdown processing what they'd just survived. 5 coordinated attacks. The kind of assault that should have dominated news for weeks, created trauma, demanded government response. Instead, it was over in 11 minutes. Resolved before most people even understood what was happening. Relief mixed with unease. They'd been saved. Efficiently, completely. Without the warmth of All Might's smile or the reassurance of traditional heroism. Just cold capability applied with surgical precision. News analysts struggled to frame the story. Was this success? Obviously. Was it reassuring? Unclear. The efficiency was undeniable. The emotional impact was troubling. Heroes saved people while making them feel safe. Izayoi had saved people while making them feel something else. Something harder to articulate. Hawks stood on a rooftop in Shibuya, looking at the cleared transit station. His teams were processing aftermath, coordinating with police, managing media. All the normal post-incident protocols, except nothing about this felt normal. His phone rang. Nezu.
Where is he now? Unknown. He doesn't stay around for debriefs. And the incident outcomes? Perfect. 0 casualties, all villains captured, minimal damage. It's exactly what we'd want from any operation. But it doesn't feel like what people want from a symbol. It feels like what they'd want from a weapon.
Nezu was quiet for a long moment.
The distinction may no longer matter. We needed capability. We have it. How society processes that capability is a problem we'll address as it develops. That's cold comfort. Comfort wasn't part of the transaction. Survival was.
In the guest quarters at Ue, Izayoi returned to find his room exactly as he'd left it. He'd spent 11 minutes addressing what the League had clearly intended as a day-long crisis. Disappointing. But at least it confirmed this world could produce some tactical thinking, even if the execution fell short. His phone showed 47 missed calls. He deleted them all and pulled up music from Little Garden. Tomorrow, someone would want debriefing, analysis, coordination for future responses. All the bureaucratic processing that followed violent incidents. He'd probably ignore most of it. The important part was simple. They'd tested him. He'd answered. Now they knew. Whether that knowledge made them bolder or more cautious wasn't his concern. Either way, it would produce responses more interesting than waiting. The city settled into uneasy night. Television coverage continued for hours. Expert analysis, survivor interviews, hero reactions, all trying to process what had just happened and what it meant. But the statement dominated discussion. 3 sentences that had shifted the entire dynamic. Analysts debated whether it was strategy or arrogance. Heroes wondered if provoking villains served any tactical purpose. Citizens argued about whether someone protecting them had the right to sound that dismissive. Nobody had good answers. The attacks had been real. The rescues had been real. The speed and efficiency had been undeniable. But the provocation changed everything. This wasn't a hero responding to threats. This was someone actively challenging villains to escalate, daring them to bring more. All Might had made people feel safe through presence and reassurance. Endeavor had tried to make them feel safe through visible strength. Izayoi made them feel safe through results that arrived too fast to process emotionally. And now he'd made it clear he was waiting for threats worth his attention. Which model was right, nobody could say. But only one was currently available. And that one had just issued a challenge the League of Villains couldn't ignore without losing all credibility. Tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever they chose to respond, the answer would come. And Izayoi would be waiting. The notification came at dawn. Not through official channels, not through hero networks. Through social media where someone had posted coordinates and a simple message, "They're coming." By the time the sun cleared the horizon, cameras were positioned across Roppongi. Not just news crews. Civilians, international press, everyone who'd heard the challenge and wanted to witness the response. Izayoi stood on the rooftop of Mori Tower, exactly where he'd said he'd be. Hands in pockets, headphones around his neck. Looking at Tokyo waking up below with the patient indifference of someone who'd already decided today would be more interesting than yesterday. Hawks arrived first landing on an adjacent building. Wings spread for rapid deployment. He'd tried calling, tried coordinating, tried establishing any kind of operational framework. Izayoi had ignored all of it.
You know they're actually coming this time. That's why I'm here. We should have support, perimeter security, evacuation protocols. You should have all that. I'm just going to end whatever shows up.
Hawks wanted to argue, wanted to explain tactical doctrine and coordinated response patterns. But the teenager's expression made it clear those concepts were irrelevant to whatever was about to happen. Below in the League's staging area, 15 kilometers south, the doctor made final adjustments to biometric controls. 15 high-end Nomu stood in formation. Not the wild beasts that earlier specimens had been. These were refined, tactical, built specifically to gather data, even if they couldn't achieve victory. Shigaraki watched from a safe distance, phone in hand, ready to coordinate through encrypted channels.
Release them all at once. Staggered deployment. 4 scouts first. Let them assess and transmit data. Then pressure units, then the primary specimens. That gives him time to adapt. He'll adapt regardless. This way we learn how he adapts. That's more valuable than a single coordinated strike that tells us nothing except he wins.
The first 4, Nomu launched. Not toward Roppongi directly. Circling approach. Testing response times. Sensory quirks, active feeding information. Back to the doctor's monitoring systems. Izayoi noticed them before visual contact. Something about the air pressure, the way space felt when objects moved through it with purpose rather than chance. He turned toward the southern sky. 4 shapes appeared. Humanoid, wings on 2 of them, enhanced musculature visible even at distance. They didn't attack immediately, just positioned themselves at cardinal points around the tower, maintaining observation distance. Smart. They were gathering information first. Izayoi waited. Let them look. It wouldn't change anything. The doctor's screens filled with biometric data, heart rate, body temperature, energy signatures, all reading as normal human baseline. No quirk activation, no power manifestation. Just a teenager standing on a roof.
Sensors aren't detecting anything anomalous. Because there's nothing to detect. He's not channeling energy or activating abilities. He just is. That should make him vulnerable to coordinated assault. Should, won't, but will confirm.
The second wave launched. 6 Nomu, each built for different assault vectors. Sonic disruption, kinetic bombardment, environmental manipulation, not meant to kill. Meant to force reaction, evasion, defensive measures that could be studied and exploited. They converged from multiple angles simultaneously. Izayoi moved. Not defensive positioning, not tactical retreat. Just walked forward and met the first Nomu mid-approach. The creature swung with force, calibrated to shatter reinforced concrete. Izayoi caught the fist, redirected momentum, and sent the Nomu through 3 walls of the adjacent building before it could activate regeneration protocols. The second Nomu tried sonic disruption, frequency designed to destabilize inner ear and induce vertigo. Izayoi walked through the sound wave like walking through light rain, grabbed the Nomu by the throat, and threw it downward hard enough that the impact crater in the street below registered on seismographs across the district. 4 more converged, coordinated. Overlapping attack patterns meant to create no escape vectors. Izayoi didn't try to escape. He went through them. 3 were down before their enhanced reflexes processed that combat had started. The 4th managed to activate its quirk, generating a barrier that had stopped anti-tank weaponry in testing. Izayoi's hand went through the barrier like it was tissue paper. Through the Nomu behind it. The creature's regeneration tried to activate, failed. Something about the impact had damaged it at a level regeneration couldn't address. 30 seconds. 6 Nomu neutralized. The doctor watched data streams with growing certainty that this was exactly what he'd expected, and exactly what he'd feared.
None of the countermeasures are working. Sonic kinetic barrier Pshura-type quirks. He's treating them all as non-existent. What about the regenerators? Are they recovering? Negative. Whatever damage he's inflicting, it's suppressing regeneration at the cellular level. They're not getting back up.
Shigaraki scratched at his neck, fingers moving in patterns that betrayed calculation rather than nervousness.
Deploy the primary specimens, all 5 simultaneously. Maximum aggression.
The final wave launched. These were the strongest. The ones with regeneration that had survived experimental weapons fire. Quirk combinations that pushed biological limits. One of them had been designed specifically to endure. They hit Roppongi Hills at different elevations, creating 3-dimensional assault coverage that left no safe zones. Izayoi noticed the difference immediately. These moved better, thought faster, actually coordinated without obvious communication. Interesting, marginally. The first primary specimen came from above, driving downward with kinetic force that would have cratered the rooftop. Izayoi sidestepped. Not urgent, just economical movement. Let the Nomu's momentum carry it into the rooftop, then struck once while it was recovering from impact. The creature's regeneration kicked in, tissue rebuilding at visible speed, bones reconstructing. It was back on its feet in 4 seconds. Izayoi hit it again, harder this time. The regeneration struggled, slowed. The Nomu stayed down for 7 seconds before attempting to rise. 3rd strike. No regeneration this time. Just stillness. The remaining 4 primary specimens observed this exchange. Adjusted tactics. 2 engaged simultaneously while the other 2 maintained flanking positions ready to exploit any opening. They were learning, adapting, using the one that had fallen as data to refine approach. Izayoi appreciated the efficiency even as he dismantled it. The dual assault came from angles calculated to force him into one attacker's range while evading the other. He ignored the calculation, moved through the predicted position without regard for the threat it was supposed to represent. Struck both Nomu in sequence. They had time to activate defensive quirks, hardening, energy absorption, adaptive resistance. None of it mattered. They hit the ground hard enough to crack the rooftop's reinforced structure. The final two specimens changed tactics completely. One generated a massive area effect quirk, temperature manipulation that should have flash-frozen everything within 50 meters. The other used the cover to close distance for a precision strike. Izayoi walked through absolute zero without slowing. Ice formed on his clothes, then shattered as he moved. The temperature meant nothing. The environmental manipulation was just scenery. He caught the charging Nomu mid-strike, held it suspended for a moment while examining its construction. Enhanced musculature, neural augmentation, regenerative core protected by redundant biological systems. All very sophisticated, all very irrelevant. He released it. The Nomu dropped, trying to recover. Its regeneration activated at maximum capacity, burning through energy reserves to repair damage that seemed to defy normal physical causation. It managed to stand, lasted 3 more seconds, then collapsed permanently. The temperature manipulator tried to adjust approach. Generate heat instead of cold. Create environmental extremes that would force reaction even from someone who seemed immune to direct assault. Izayoi ended the attempt before it fully formed. Silence settled over Roppongi Hills. 15 high-end Nomu scattered across rooftops and streets. Some beginning to dissolve as biological cohesion failed. Others simply motionless, their enhanced systems unable to process what had hit them. Total elapsed time 4 minutes 17 seconds. Izayoi looked at the carnage without particular satisfaction. This had been a test, not theirs of him, his of this world's supposed peak threats. The ceiling was disappointingly low. In the monitoring room, the doctor reviewed recorded data with a detached focus of someone observing experimental failure. Biometrics, combat telemetry, regeneration rates, all of it painting a picture that confirmed what they'd suspected but hoped to disprove.
Complete failure across all metrics. Sonic disruption ineffective. Physical barriers ignored. Regeneration suppressed by unknown mechanism. Environmental manipulation produced 0 tactical advantage.
Shigaraki stared at screens showing motionless Nomu.
15 high ends. Our entire strategic reserve. Gone in 4 minutes. We gained data. Confirmation that quirk-based combat against this individual is futile. That has value. Does it... What do we do with that information? Build non-quirk weapons? We're not equipped for that. The entire power structure of this world is quirk-based.
The doctor closed his laptop.
Then we accept that direct confrontation is no longer viable and shift to strategies he can't simply walk through. Psychological warfare. Systemic disruption. Make him irrelevant by making the conflict about things other than raw capability. And if that doesn't work either, then we've learned something about the limits of rebellion in a world where absolute power exists.
Across Tokyo, cameras that had broadcast the fight live went to stunned commentary. Analysts struggled to frame what they'd just witnessed. 4 minutes. 15 creatures that had been designed to kill All Might. All neutralized with the same casual efficiency as the previous day's incidents. No struggle. No dramatic battle. Just systematic dismantling of threats that should have required coordinated hero teams and extensive planning. Public reaction wasn't celebration. It was something closer to shock. The kind that came from watching fundamental assumptions about power and protection get rewritten in real time. At UA, students who'd watched the broadcast sat in silence. Midoriya's notebook lay closed. There was nothing to analyze, no strategy to study, no technique to break down into teachable components. Just overwhelming capability applied without visible effort. Bakugo left the common room without speaking. His hands had stopped trembling. They'd moved past trembling into something colder. Recognition that the gap he'd been fighting to close with Deku wasn't even the relevant gap anymore. Todoroki remained watching footage replay. The way Izayoi moved through attacks that would have killed professional heroes. The complete absence of concern or calculation. Just certainty that nothing present could threaten him. This was what power looked like when it existed outside the framework society had built to contain it. In his hospital room, Endeavor watched without commentary. His physical therapy schedule lay forgotten on the bedside table. Recovery timeline didn't matter when the entire profession had just been redefined by a 17-year-old who'd accomplished in minutes what Endeavor had spent decades training toward. Hawks stood on a building overlooking the cleared battlefield. Medical teams were securing the Nomu remains. Police establishing crime scene protocols. Heroes coordinating with commission liaisons about containment procedures. All normal post-incident work. Except nothing was normal. Everyone moving with the mechanical precision of people going through motions because stopping meant acknowledging what they'd just witnessed. His phone rang. Nezu.
Assessment. He didn't even try. That wasn't combat. That was extermination. Clinical, efficient, like he was clearing obstacles, not fighting threats. And the public response? Fear. Not of villains, of him. They're grateful, but they're scared of what they're grateful for.
Nezu was quiet for a moment.
Fear and gratitude can coexist. The question is which one becomes dominant over time. What if it's fear? Then we'll have created something effective but unwanted. Success without acceptance. Survival without comfort. Is that enough? It will have to be. The alternative was collapse.
On the Mori Tower rooftop, Izayoi stood alone looking at Tokyo spread below. The city continued its morning routine. Traffic, commerce, people going about lives made possible by the assumption that protection existed. They had that protection now, just not the kind they'd expected. He pulled out his headphones, put them on, started music that had nothing to do with this world or its problems. The fight had confirmed what he'd suspected. This world's power ceiling was lower than Little Garden's. Significantly lower. The strongest things it could produce still operated within frameworks he could ignore. Disappointing, but informative. Someone would want debriefing, analysis, discussion about tactics and future threats. He'd probably ignore most of it. The important parts were simple. They'd tested him with everything they had. It wasn't enough. Now they knew. What they did with that knowledge wasn't his concern. Below, news helicopters circled at safe distance, cameras still recording, broadcasts continuing. The world processing what it had just witnessed and trying to fit it into categories that made sense. Symbol of peace. Strategic asset. Uncontrollable variable. None of the labels quite fit. He wasn't a symbol, wasn't an asset, wasn't even particularly interested in control. He was just someone waiting for this world to produce something worth his actual attention. And based on today's performance, that wait might be longer than expected. The music played. The city moved. And somewhere people who'd challenged him were recalculating everything they thought they understood about power and its applications. Good. Uncertainty was more interesting than false confidence. And if nothing else, this world was learning to be uncertain about exactly the right things. The commission meeting started at 6 in the morning. Not scheduled, not announced. Just 15 people summoned through encrypted channels to discuss what couldn't be discussed through official protocols. The conference room felt smaller than usual, despite being the same size. Maybe because the weight of yesterday's events compressed the air. Or maybe because everyone present understood they were no longer managing a crisis. They were managing something that had already escaped management. A woman in her 60s, Commission Director of Strategic Operations, stood at the head of the table. No presentation materials, no data displays, just the flat exhaustion of someone who'd spent 12 hours trying to frame the unframable.
15 high-end Nomu, 4 minutes, 0 casualties. We should be celebrating.
Nobody celebrated.
Instead, we're fielding calls from foreign governments, asking what exactly we've introduced to global security dynamics. Media demanding clarification on whether we control him or he controls us. And internal reports suggesting public sentiment is shifting from gratitude to something considerably less comfortable.
Fear.
The word came from a younger analyst near the back. He'd compiled overnight polling data that painted pictures nobody wanted to examine closely.
Elaborate.
73% approve of the outcome. 61% feel safer knowing he exists, but 84% report feeling uncomfortable with how the victory was achieved. Words that keep appearing in qualitative responses: clinical, inhuman, overwhelming, unstoppable.
He pulled up graphs that showed sentiment trends diverging, safety metrics rising, comfort metrics falling, the gap widening hourly.
People want protection, but they want it to feel protective. What they witnessed yesterday felt more like extermination.
He saved lives, neutralized threats designed specifically to kill heroes. That should outweigh aesthetic concerns.
Should doesn't. Emotions aren't logical.
Hawk spoke from his position near the window wings, folded tight against his back.
The problem isn't what he did. It's that we can't explain how he did it. No quirk activation, no visible technique, just absolute dominance that makes everything we've built our society around look obsolete.
That's an overstatement.
Is it those Nomu had regeneration that withstood anti-tank weaponry? Quirk combinations that required entire hero teams to counter? He walked through all of it like it was scenery. What do we call that if not obsolescence?
Silence settled over the table. Someone coughed. Papers rustled. Small sounds that filled space where answers should have been. The Strategic Operations Director sat down, suddenly looking every day of her 63 years.
So, what are our options? We committed to this course. We legitimized him. We can't simply reverse that without admitting catastrophic judgment failure.
We could begin distancing gradually. Frame him as provisional asset rather than permanent fixture. Create operational independence that allows us to claim credit for successes while maintaining deniability for AI complications.
That's cowardice dressed as strategy.
That's survival instinct acknowledging reality. He doesn't need us, doesn't answer to us, doesn't operate within any framework we can influence. We're not managing him. We're just nearby when things happen.
Another voice joined the discussion. Older man, legal background evident in his careful phrasing.
There's precedent for reclassifying assets based on operational evolution. We wouldn't be removing him, just recontextualizing his relationship to official hero infrastructure.
Recontextualizing. That's what we're calling it now.
We're calling it practical assessment of sustainable oversight models.
Hawks turned from the window.
You're talking about cutting him loose, making him someone else's problem. Except he's not a problem. He's effective, terrifyingly effective. And the moment we distance ourselves, someone else will try to leverage that effectiveness.
Then what do you suggest? Continue as we are, pretend we have control we clearly lack?
I suggest we acknowledge what he actually is. Not a hero, not an asset, something else entirely. And we build frameworks that accept that reality instead of trying to force him into categories he was never going to fit.
The meeting continued for another hour. Circular arguments. Careful language around uncomfortable truths. Everyone dancing around the core issue they'd introduced something into the system that the system couldn't digest. When it finally adjourned, nobody left feeling reassured. At UA, classes proceeded with hollow normalcy. Teachers taught, students attended, all the mechanical processes of education continuing. Because stopping meant acknowledging that yesterday had changed fundamental assumptions about what they were training for. Midoriya sat in class, notebook open, pen ready. But the pages remained blank. His analytical frameworks had failed yesterday. Completely. There was nothing to break down. No technique to study. No strategy to reverse engineer. Just capabilities so far beyond current understanding that analysis became meaningless. Bakugo hadn't spoken since yesterday. Not insults, not challenges, not his usual aggressive engagement with everything. Just silence that felt denser than any explosion he'd ever generated. Todoroki noticed. They all noticed. But nobody commented, because commenting meant admitting they all felt it, the gap between where they were and where someone their age had already reached. After classes ended, students gathered in common areas with phones out, rewatching footage that had gone global. Frame-by-frame analysis by people who understood quirks, trying to identify how Izayoi functioned. All of them failing to find answers.
Maybe it's not a quirk. Maybe it's something else.
Midoriya looked up. Uraraka had spoken, voicing what others were thinking, but hadn't articulated.
Like what? I don't know, but All Might had one for all. Specific mechanism. Visible power transfer. This isn't like that. It's more like rules don't apply to him.
Rules always apply. That's what makes them rules.
We watched him walk through absolute zero, through sonic disruption, through barriers designed to reflect kinetic force. At what point do we accept that some things operate outside our understanding?
Nobody had good counter-arguments. In the hospital, Endeavor had stopped watching news coverage. Physical therapy continued. Bones healed according to predictable timelines. But motivation for recovery felt increasingly hollow. He'd spent decades becoming strong enough to stand where All Might stood. Training until his body became a weapon capable of overwhelming most threats through sheer determination and calculated application of power. Yesterday, a 17-year-old had demonstrated that all of that was irrelevant. Not inferior, irrelevant. The entire framework of strength through training and refinement meant nothing when someone existed who simply bypassed those requirements. Shoto visited, sat in the chair beside the hospital bed. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Endeavor broke the silence.
Your generation won't need what I spent my life building. That's not true. It is. He's proven it. Power at his level makes everything we've developed obsolete. Training regimens, tactical doctrine, strategic coordination, all of it designed for a world where that kind of absolute capability doesn't exist.
Shoto considered this.
Maybe that just means we need to develop different things he can't replace. Like what? I don't know yet, but power isn't the only thing heroes provide.
Endeavor wanted to believe that. Wanted to find comfort in the idea that heroism encompassed more than capability. But yesterday had made it clear when threats appeared that required absolute power to counter everything else became secondary. Across the city, in a bar that served as the League's current headquarters, Shigaraki reviewed footage with clinical detachment. Not angry, not defeated, just calculating. The doctor sat nearby, running simulations on biological warfare models that didn't involve direct combat.
We can't beat him, that's established. Correct. So we make him irrelevant, not through defeating him, through making society reject him. How?
Shigaraki leaned back, fingers moving to his neck in familiar patterns.
He saves people, efficiently, completely, without the warmth All Might provided, without the reassurance traditional heroes offer. He's effective but alienating. And we exploit that alienation. We amplify it. Makes people see him as threat rather than protection. Not through lies, through truth. He is dangerous. He is uncontrollable. He does operate outside every framework society has built. We just make sure everyone focuses on those facts instead of the protection he provides.
The doctor pulled up draft propaganda materials. Nothing explicit. Just careful framing. Questions posed innocently that led to uncomfortable conclusions. Who controls him? What happens if his interests diverge from ours? How do we know he won't decide we're the problem?
Seed doubt. Let it grow organically. Force Commission to choose between defending him and maintaining public trust. That's long-term strategy. Could take months. I have months. He's not going anywhere. And the longer he stays, the more uncomfortable people become. Time is our weapon now.
In the guest quarters at Izayoi lay on his bed headphones, unprocessing the shift in atmosphere he'd noticed over the past 12 hours. The way people looked at him had changed. Not hostile, not grateful. Something between recognition and wariness. Acknowledgement that he existed, but uncertainty about what that existence meant for them. Interesting development. He'd seen similar patterns in Little Garden. When someone demonstrated power significantly beyond local norms, communities reacted with mixed gratitude and fear. Natural response. Reasonable even. Didn't affect him either way. He wasn't here for acceptance. Just for whatever this world might eventually produce that justified staying. A knock interrupted the music. He pulled off his headphones.
Yeah?
Nezu entered alone this time, carrying a tablet but not immediately referencing it.
I wanted to discuss yesterday's outcome. You mean how everyone's scared now? Concerned would be more accurate, though scared isn't entirely wrong.
Nezu sat in the room's single chair.
You accomplished exactly what we hoped. Neutralized overwhelming threats with minimal collateral impact. From operational standpoint, it was perfect. But perfection in this context creates complications. Society doesn't know how to process what you represent. You're too effective, too far beyond their reference points. That's not my problem. No, but it becomes a problem for everyone when fear begins outweighing gratitude.
Izayoi sat up interested despite himself.
What are they actually afraid of? That you might decide they're not worth protecting. That your power has no checks. That if you ever became a threat, nothing could stop you. All true, yes. Which is why the fear is rational. People can live with irrational fears. Rational ones are much harder to dismiss.
Silence settled between them. Outside campus activity continued. Students, teachers, all the infrastructure of normal life proceeding, while fundamental questions about power and protection went unresolved.
Are you asking me to leave? I'm observing that your presence is creating tensions we may not be equipped to manage. What you choose to do with that observation is entirely your decision. I'm bored here anyway. This world doesn't produce threats worth the attention. Then perhaps staying serves neither your interests nor ours.
Izayoi considered this. He'd come here by accident. Stayed because Nezu had offered possibility of interesting challenges. Those challenges had proven disappointing. The strongest things this world could produce still operated within frameworks he could ignore. No growth opportunity, no actual test. Just increasingly uncomfortable social dynamics he had no interest in navigating.
I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Though I will note if you do choose to leave, the method matters. Dramatic exits create narratives. Quiet departures allow people to process change gradually. You want me to just disappear. I want whatever creates least disruption to systems already under significant strain.
After Nezu left, Izayoi returned to his music. But the decision had essentially been made. This world had tested him with everything it had. The test had been unsatisfying. Staying longer just meant watching society struggle with his existence while producing nothing that justified the observation. Better to leave. Find his way back to Little Garden, or somewhere else that might actually challenge him. The mechanics of departure could wait, but the certainty was there. He'd given this world a chance. It hadn't met the minimum threshold for sustained interest. Time to move on. Across Tokyo, news cycles continued processing yesterday's events through every available analytical lens. Political, social, tactical, psychological, all searching for frameworks that made sense of what they'd witnessed. None quite succeeding. Polls showed continuing divergence. Safety metrics rising as people recognized that threats could be neutralized. Comfort metrics falling as people recognized the person doing the neutralizing operated completely outside their understanding or control. The commission held follow-up meetings, adjusting language, refining messaging, trying to thread needles that kept getting smaller. Heroes continued their work with new awareness that their profession had been fundamentally redefined, whether they were ready or not. Students trained with questions they couldn't voice about whether training mattered anymore. And somewhere, Shigaraki prepared propaganda that would turn protection into threat through nothing more than careful emphasis on truths people were already thinking. The city breathed, functioned, continued. But something had broken yesterday that couldn't be repaired through reassurance or time. The belief that power and protection were naturally aligned, that strength served society rather than existing independent of it, that the strongest among them would always choose to be heroes rather than something else entirely. Izayoi had shattered those assumptions without trying, just by being what he was and doing what came naturally. And now everyone was left processing the aftermath of certainties that had turned out to be wishes. Tomorrow would bring more adjustments, more attempts to restore balance to systems disrupted by absolute capability. But some disruptions were permanent. And this one had names: fear built on rational assessment and gratitude mixed with dread. Society could survive it, but it would never quite recover. The emergency session convened in a room without windows, not the standard conference space. A secure facility 3 floors underground, where conversations about national security happened away from recording devices and public oversight. 12 people. Commission leadership, government liaisons, intelligence officers whose official titles said nothing about what they actually did. The woman who'd led yesterday's meeting wasn't present, replaced by someone older, harder with security clearance that went beyond hero work into areas where morality became negotiable. He didn't introduce himself, just activated the room's countermeasures and began speaking.
We have an asset with capabilities exceeding anything in recorded history. No biological markers we can track, no energy signatures we can monitor, no framework for predicting behavior or limiting application of force.
He pulled up files on a screen. Not public footage, internal assessments, psychological profiles that admitted more uncertainty than conclusion.
Yesterday demonstrated what we already suspected: direct opposition is futile. Containment through conventional means is impossible, which leaves us with limited options for managing someone who could theoretically decide tomorrow that our interests no longer align with his.
A government liaison spoke carefully.
Are we discussing contingency planning or active measures? We're discussing reality. This individual saved lives, neutralized threats, accomplished objectives we desperately needed achieved. But effectiveness doesn't equal loyalty, and loyalty we can't verify is liability waiting to manifest.
Someone else at the table shifted uncomfortably.
He's cooperated thus far, responded to requests, hasn't shown hostile intent toward civilians or infrastructure.
Thus far. But cooperation based on boredom rather than commitment creates predictable risk. The moment something more interesting appears elsewhere, or the moment he decides this society's frameworks irritate him sufficiently, we have no mechanisms for influencing his choices.
The room went quiet. Everyone processing implications that sounded like preparing for conflict with someone they'd introduced as protection.
I'm authorizing Protocol Surveillance 7, full observation, movement tracking, communication monitoring, behavioral analysis in real time. We need complete information architecture around this asset. That level of scrutiny requires resources currently allocated to reallocate them. This takes priority over everything except immediate existential threats. and arguably unmanaged capability of this magnitude is an existential threat.
Papers were distributed. Authorization codes, operational frameworks for surveillance that looked like security, but felt like preparation for something darker. One person didn't take the documents. A woman in her 40s who'd been silent until now.
This assumes he doesn't notice. Someone with his awareness will detect surveillance within hours.
Then we'll know how he responds to being monitored. That data has value regardless of whether concealment succeeds.
And if his response is deciding we're hostile,
Then we discover that truth before he's integrated deeply enough into operations to cause maximum damage when the break occurs.
She stood.
This is how we create enemies from allies, treating protection as threat because we can't control it absolutely.
Sit down or leave. Either way, authorization proceeds.
She left. The door closed behind her with finality that felt like epitaph for approaches that prioritized trust over certainty. The meeting continued for another hour. Technical specifications for monitoring systems, personnel assignments, contingency protocols if escalation became necessary. By the time it adjourned, a decision had been made that couldn't be unmade. Izayoi would be watched, studied, assessed not as asset, but as potential threat requiring management. Hawks received his updated orders at dawn through encrypted channels. Read them twice, then sat in his apartment staring at his phone for 20 minutes, trying to find angles that didn't exist. The language was careful, professional. But the substance was unmistakable. He was being reassigned from handler to intelligence officer, from managing cooperation to documenting behavior for threat assessment purposes. Report daily movements, note interaction patterns, flag any indication of declining cooperation or increasing independence. Build the file that would be used when not if decisions about containment became necessary. His phone buzzed. Nezu requesting immediate contact.
You saw the new protocols. Hard to miss. They're asking me to spy on someone who hasn't done anything except exactly what we needed. They're preparing for contingencies. It's rational from their perspective. Rationale doesn't mean right. No, but it means predictable. Fear of uncontrolled power drives people toward control mechanisms regardless of whether those mechanisms solve the underlying concern.
Hawks leaned against his window, looking at the city waking up below.
He's going to notice. You know that, right? Someone like him notices everything. Almost certainly. And when he does, then we discover whether he cares enough about staying to tolerate surveillance or whether being watched becomes the final irritation that makes departure inevitable.
Hawks wanted to argue. Wanted to find the angle that prevented this from becoming what it was clearly becoming. But Nezu was right. Fear had momentum. And momentum didn't care about intentions.
What do you want me to do? Follow orders or resign. Those are your only ethical options. Anything between them just makes you complicit in outcomes you can't prevent.
The call ended. Hawks looked at the authorization codes, the reporting templates, all the infrastructure of treating a 17-year-old who'd saved countless lives like an enemy combatant whose patterns needed documentation for future neutralization. He started composing his first report. Hated every word. Kept writing anyway, because the alternative was abandoning his position and losing even the minimal influence it provided. At UA, rumors had begun circulating through channels students used when official information failed them. Social media. Encrypted messaging, fragments from families with commission connections. Izayoi was being watched. Not protected. Watched. The distinction mattered. The cafeteria buzzed with speculation during breakfast. Most of it wrong in details, but right in essence something had shifted. The person they'd been told to view as strategic asset was being re-evaluated as potential liability. Midoriya sat with his usual group listening to theories range from reasonable to absurd. He didn't contribute, just processed information through frameworks that kept expanding to accommodate increasingly complex moral questions. Uraraka noticed his silence.
You okay?
Just thinking. If someone's strong enough that nothing can stop them, does that make them dangerous even if they haven't done anything wrong?
I don't know. Probably depends on what they might do.
But that's the problem. Might isn't the same as will. We can't punish people for theoretical threats.
Ida joined the conversation, always ready to apply regulatory frameworks to moral ambiguity.
There's precedent for preventive measures when potential harm exceeds acceptable risk thresholds. It's why we have hero licensing, why quirks are regulated. Except he doesn't have a quirk, doesn't fit categories. So what regulations apply? That's a valid concern.
Bakugo had been quiet since the Nomu incident. Now he spoke without looking up from his food.
They're scared, that's all this is. Scared of something they can't beat, can't control, can't even understand. So they're doing what scared people always do. Trying to put chains on something that doesn't need their permission to exist.
The table went silent. Bakugo rarely offered insight that wasn't wrapped in aggression. When he did, people listened.
And you know what happens when you try to chain something that strong. You find out real fast whether it tolerates chains or breaks them.
Todoroki set down his cup.
Which do you think he'll choose? Don't know, don't care. Just saying if they push him, they better be ready for what pushing back looks like.
In his guest quarters, Izayoi had noticed the changes 3 hours after they'd been implemented. Cameras repositioned, monitoring equipment installed in adjacent buildings, personnel rotations that prioritized surveillance over security, not subtle. Maybe not meant to be. He lay on his bed, headphones on, processing this development, with the same analytical detachment he'd applied to everything else in this world. They were afraid. Naturally. Fear of uncontrollable variables made sense from a systems management perspective. What interested him more was what they planned to do about that fear. Watch and wait, or escalate toward confrontation. Either option provided information about how this society actually functioned under pressure. Whether it defaulted to negotiation or control when facing things, it couldn't categorize. A knock on the door interrupted his analysis. He pulled off his headphones.
Yeah.
Hawks entered, looking like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. Wings drooping slightly in a way that suggested exhaustion went beyond physical.
Need to talk officially about the surveillance.
Hawks stopped, blinked.
You know, hard to miss. They're not being subtle about it. No, I suppose they're not.
Hawks sat in the room's chair. Didn't pull out recording equipment or official documentation. Just sat there, looking like someone forced to deliver messages he didn't agree with.
They're scared. Commission government, everyone with authority over hero operations. What you did with those Nomu demonstrated something they can't process through normal frameworks. I noticed, hence the cameras. It's more than cameras. Full behavioral monitoring, threat assessment protocols. They're building profiles for contingency planning. Contingencies meaning how to deal with me if I become a problem. Yes.
Izayoi considered this.
Are you asking me something, warning me, or just following orders to inform targets they're being watched?
Hawks flinched at targets.
I'm trying to be honest about what's happening. You saved lives. You did exactly what we needed. But effectiveness without controllability scares people in positions where control is their primary tool. So they're preparing to control me, or eliminate me if control fails. That's an accurate summary of strategic thinking, yes.
Silence settled between them. Outside campus, life continued. Students heading to classes, teachers preparing lessons, all normal activity that had nothing to do with conversations about whether heroes and governments could coexist with someone they couldn't manage.
Does it bother you? Being watched like a threat? No, it's predictable. Society's built on managed expectations. I exceed those expectations in ways that can't be managed. Surveillance is logical response. But you're not going to cooperate with it. I haven't decided yet. Depends on whether staying here serves any purpose.
Hawks leaned forward.
Staying keeps people alive. The threats aren't going to stop just because you leave. They managed before I arrived. They'll manage after I leave. Maybe less efficiently, but that's not my responsibility. Is anything your responsibility, or are we all just entertainment until something more interesting appears?
The question came out harder than Hawks probably intended. Frustration bleeding through professional control. Izayoi met his eyes without defensiveness or anger. Just stating facts.
I didn't ask to be here. Didn't volunteer for your crisis. I showed up by accident and stayed because your principal made it sound like this world might produce something worth my attention. It hasn't. So yeah, my responsibility is exactly what I choose it to be, same as everyone. That's honest, at least. I don't lie. Lying requires caring enough about outcomes to manipulate them. I don't care that much.
Hawk stood, wings spreading slightly, before folding again.
They're going to escalate. Surveillance is just the first step. If you keep being effective but uncontrollable, they'll eventually reach for harder options. What kind of options? I don't know. Nothing that works, probably. But they'll try anyway, because trying feels better than admitting some things exceed their authority.
He moved toward the door, then paused.
For what it's worth, I think you've been more help than threat. But my opinion doesn't matter when fear becomes policy.
After Hawks left, Izayoi returned to his music. But the decision was crystallizing. This world had tested him, found him effective. Then decided effectiveness without obedience was too dangerous to tolerate. Fair enough. He'd never agreed to obedience. Just temporary cooperation while evaluating whether this place warranted sustained attention. Evaluation complete. Answer no. Time to leave before escalation turned into something tedious, like attempted containment or restriction of movement. He'd tolerate surveillance. It was harmless. But actual interference would require response that benefited nobody. Better to just go. Find his way back to Little Garden, or somewhere else that operated on scales he found less disappointing. Across the city in a cafe that had become League headquarters through default rather than design. Shigaraki watched live feeds from camera drones positioned near UA. Not close enough to trigger security, just close enough to document movements. The doctor sat nearby reviewing propaganda materials, ready for distribution across carefully cultivated social media networks.
The commission's escalating. Surveillance protocols activated this morning. Full monitoring suite. They're doing our work for us. Every increase in control measures makes him look less like protection and more like prisoner. Will it matter he can leave whenever he wants? Exactly. And when he does, when their perfect weapon walks away because they couldn't keep him happy, the narrative writes itself. Symbols you can't control aren't symbols. They're just power waiting to turn on you.
Shigaraki pulled up draft messaging. Posts questioning Izayoi's loyalties. Articles wondering what happens when absolute strength decides it doesn't need permission. All framed as legitimate concern rather than manipulation.
How long until we release these? Give it 3 days. Let surveillance become news. Let public discourse shift from gratitude to unease. Then we amplify existing fears with questions nobody wants to think about but can't avoid once they're asked. And if he actually leaves, then we win completely. Society invested in him, built hopes around him. His departure proves those hopes were always misplaced, that you can't build stability on things you don't own.
The doctor closed his laptop.
This is more effective than Nomu ever were. Nomu fought symptoms. This attacks the disease belief that power serves society instead of itself.
Evening settled over Tokyo. News cycles continued their analysis of recent events. Public opinion polls showed continuing divergence between safety metrics and comfort levels. Political discussions grew more heated as different factions tried to claim correct interpretation of what Izayoi represented. Nobody had good answers. Just positions defended with increasing certainty that inversely correlated with actual understanding. At UA, Nezu reviewed surveillance reports that he'd been copied on despite not requesting them, watching institutional fear transform into institutional preparation for conflict that might be entirely self-inflicted. He composed messages recommending de-escalation, sent them to appropriate authorities, knew they'd be filed and ignored because fear didn't respond to logic, only to momentum. And momentum was building toward confrontation nobody actually wanted, but everyone was preparing for anyway. In his guest quarters, Izayoi made his decision. Not dramatic, not emotional, just practical assessment that staying served no purpose and leaving avoided complications. He'd give it one more day, see if anything changed. If surveillance escalated to interference, he'd leave immediately. If it stayed at current levels, he'd leave tomorrow. Either way, this chapter was closing. This world had its chance. Produced nothing worth extended attention. Time to move on. The city continued its evening routine. Traffic, dinner, entertainment. Millions of people living lives made possible by assumption that protection existed and would continue existing. That assumption was about to be tested in ways that would reshape how an entire society understood the relationship between power and permission. But tonight, for now, routine held. Tomorrow would bring cracks nobody was quite ready to acknowledge. And in those cracks, everything they'd built around the idea of a controllable symbol would start crumbling into truth they'd been avoiding. Some things exist beyond permission, and trying to contain them just hastens the moment they decide to leave. 3 days. That's how long Izayoi didn't respond to anything. No emergency calls, no commission briefings, no media appearances, just silence from someone the entire country had been watching, waiting for the next demonstration of overwhelming capability. The silence was worse than any threat. News networks filled airtime with speculation. Analysts debated whether his absence meant departure or preparation for something larger. Social media fractured into camps, arguing whether they should be relieved or terrified that someone with his capacity had gone quiet. Commission headquarters operated on emergency protocols designed for national disasters. Except the disaster was absence rather than presence. The thing they'd feared becoming uncontrollable had simply stopped being available for control attempts. In a conference room that smelled like exhausted fear and stale coffee, the same people who'd authorized surveillance 3 days ago now discussed escalation they'd hoped to avoid. The man who'd led that session looked even harder now. Less certain, more desperate.
Protocol containment is authorized. Soft implementation. We're not arresting him. We're establishing operational boundaries.
A younger officer raised the obvious question.
And if he ignores those boundaries, then we escalate to hard containment and accept whatever consequences follow. But we can't have assets with this capability operating without oversight. It sets precedents that destroy the entire framework of managed hero society.
He's not an asset anymore. He's made that clear by not responding.
Then he's a free agent with capabilities that exceed anything in recorded history, which is worse. At least assets have contracts. Free agents answer to nothing except their own judgment.
Someone at the back spoke carefully.
We could offer better terms, negotiation rather than restriction. We tried negotiation. He cooperated when interested and ignored us when not. That's not negotiation, that's tolerance. And tolerance ends when annoyance exceeds benefit.
Papers were distributed. Legal frameworks for public containment protocols. Language about emergency measures and temporary restrictions on individuals whose actions impact national security. All dressed in bureaucratic legitimacy that couldn't quite hide what it actually was, preparation to cage something they couldn't kill. The meeting adjourned without resolution. Just momentum toward confrontation nobody wanted, but everyone was preparing for anyway. Hawks received his orders at midnight. Report to guest quarters, deliver ultimatum, document response for assessment purposes. He didn't sleep before going. Just sat in his apartment, looking at authorization papers that transformed him from liaison to enforcer. The language was careful, professional. But the substance remained clear. Tell Izayoi he was being contained whether he cooperated or not. Dawn came gray and cold. Hawks flew to UA. slower than necessary buying time that wouldn't change anything. By the time he reached the guest quarters, he'd run through every conversation approach and discarded them all as inadequate. The door was unlocked. He knocked anyway.
Come in.
Izayoi sat on the bed, headphones around his neck, looking at Hawks. With the same mild attention he'd given everything in this world. Not hostile, not friendly, just present. Hawks stood in the doorway, wings folded tight.
They're implementing containment protocols, public announcement in 6 hours, movement restrictions, mandatory reporting. They're framing it as coordination rather than limitation, but we both know what it actually is. Okay.
The calm acceptance threw Hawks more than argument would have.
You're not going to fight it. Fighting it means I care. I don't care enough to fight. I care enough to leave.
Hawks moved into the room, closing the door behind him.
Leaving doesn't solve anything. The threats are still here. People still need protection. They needed it before I arrived. They'll need it after I'm gone. That's not my responsibility. When did it stop being your responsibility? You saved thousands of lives. You proved you could make a difference.
Izayoi tilted his head slightly, considering the question with actual interest.
It was never my responsibility. I did things because they were in front of me, and stopping threats was less boring than watching them succeed. But responsibility implies obligation. I don't have obligations to this world. I didn't choose to be here.
Hawks sat in the room's single chair. Not because protocol required it. Because standing felt like preparing for combat that wasn't going to happen.
So you're just going to walk away. Leave everyone to deal with whatever comes next. Yes?
The simplicity of it was almost offensive. No justification, no apology. Just acknowledgement of decision made and intention to follow through. Hawks looked at authorization papers he was supposed to deliver. Legal language about boundaries and restrictions. All meaningless when applied to someone who could ignore them without effort.
If you leave, do they chase you?
Izayoi met his eyes directly.
Do you?
Hawks wanted to say no. Wanted to draw a line between government mandate and personal choice. But the authorization papers in his hand represented exactly that lack of distinction. Handler had become intelligence officer, had become potential enforcer. The slide was gradual, but the destination was clear. He didn't answer. The silence said everything. Izayoi nodded slowly.
That's what I thought.
Hawk stood, moving toward the door, then stopped.
For what it's worth, I think they're making a mistake. You were effective, you saved lives. Trying to control that effectiveness instead of accepting it is going to end badly for everyone. Probably. Does that bother you? No, they made their choices. I'm making mine. What happens after is just consequence.
After Hawks left, Izayoi stood and looked out the window at UA's campus. Students moving between buildings. Teachers preparing lessons. All the infrastructure of training heroes to protect a society that was learning its protective frameworks might not matter when threats exceeded those frameworks. He'd spent weeks here, evaluated the world's capacity for producing interesting challenges. Found it lacking. The strongest things this society could generate still operated within rules he could ignore. No growth opportunity. No actual test of capability, just increasing social complications he had zero interest in navigating. Time to go. But first, one last action. Not for them, for himself. To establish terms before departing. In central Tokyo, a situation was developing that would normally trigger hero response within minutes. Industrial complex taken over by villains equipped with experimental weapons. Hostages, demands, the standard pattern of violent leverage. Heroes were mobilizing, commission coordinating, media helicopters circling at safe distance. Izayoi appeared on the roof of the occupied building. No announcement, no coordination with heroes staging 3 blocks away. Just presence where he decided presence was needed. He looked down at the chaos below. Villains inside the complex, believing their weapons and hostages created negotiating position. Heroes outside planning tactical approach that minimized casualties while maximizing capture probability. All very strategic, all very careful, all very slow. Izayoi dropped through a skylight into the main floor where hostages were being held. The villains reacted exactly as trained. Activated experimental weapons designed to counter quirk-based threats with electromagnetic disruption and kinetic suppression fields. He walked through the disruption like walking through mist, through the suppression fields like they were decorative lighting. Reached the first villain before defensive protocols could fully engage. 4 minutes later, all hostages were outside. All villains were unconscious. The building was structurally intact. Izayoi walked out the front entrance while heroes were still positioning for entry. Cameras caught him. Media drones zoomed in. Questions started immediately from reporters who'd witnessed something that defied every operational protocol. He didn't stop to answer, just looked directly at the nearest camera and spoke clearly.
I'm not your hero. I'm not your enemy. I act when I decide something needs to end. That's all. Don't expect more. Don't demand less.
Then he walked away. Through the police perimeter, past heroes who stood aside because stopping him wasn't feasible or wise. Into the city where cameras couldn't easily follow. The footage went viral within minutes. Not because of the rescue, because of the statement. 7 sentences that redefined everything they'd been trying to make him represent. Not a symbol of peace, not a pillar of society, just someone who ended things when he chose to end them. No permission requested, no authority acknowledged. In the commission headquarters, people watched the footage with the hollow understanding that they'd lost something they'd never actually possessed. The illusion of control. The belief that effectiveness could be channeled into institutional frameworks. Hawks watched from his office, knowing he'd see this footage used in threat assessment briefings within hours. Evidence that Izayoi operated completely outside oversight, despite their attempts at boundaries. Proof that containment was already irrelevant before it could be implemented. At UA, students gathered around screens showing the rescue and the statement. Opinions divided immediately. Some saw honesty. Someone powerful enough to be unaccountable choosing to help anyway. Others saw danger. Someone powerful enough to be unaccountable, having no loyalty except to his own judgment. Both perspectives were accurate. Both were terrifying in different ways. Midoriya wrote in his notebook for the first time since the Nomu incident. Not analysis of technique, just questions about what symbols actually meant when divorced from institutional backing. Could someone be a symbol without wanting to be one? Could protection exist without the reassurance that traditionally came with it? Could society function when its strongest defender explicitly refused to be part of the system? No good answers. Just questions that would reshape how his entire generation thought about heroism. Endeavor watched from his hospital room. Physical therapy had progressed enough that he could move without assistance now. Recovery timeline said 2 more months before combat readiness. The timeline felt irrelevant. What he'd spent decades building toward being strong enough to stand as symbol had been replaced by someone who rejected the entire concept while demonstrating capacity that exceeded it. Not jealousy, not anger. Just recognition that the profession had fundamentally changed in a way training couldn't address. Shoto visited during evening hours. They watched news coverage together in silence that felt less uncomfortable than previous visits. Shared acknowledgement that they were both processing changes too large for immediate comprehension.
Do you think he'll actually leave? Yes? And then what? Then we discover whether society learned to protect itself during his time here or whether we just became dependent on something we were never going to keep.
In the League's headquarters, Shigaraki watched the rescue footage with something approaching satisfaction. Not because Izayoi had helped people, because he'd done it while explicitly rejecting the entire framework of hero society. The doctor sat nearby, already drafting messaging that would amplify exactly this point.
He's doing our work for us. Every action that proves he doesn't need their permission undermines the entire concept of managed heroism. But he's still protecting people. That doesn't help our goals. It does, because he's proving symbols don't need institutions, which means institutions don't actually provide the protection they claim. They just manage it, and management can be rejected.
Shigaraki leaned back, fingers moving to his neck in familiar patterns.
He's making this world honest, forcing everyone to acknowledge that power doesn't serve society. Society just hopes power chooses to be merciful. And when he leaves, then we capitalize on the vacuum. The absence of someone who was never really part of their system anyway. Proof that symbols are temporary and loyalty is myth.
Evening settled over Tokyo. The rescued hostages gave interviews praising their savior, while questioning why someone so capable seemed so disconnected from heroic ideals. Heroes issued statements about coordinated response efforts that sounded hollow, given how events had actually unfolded. Commission officials held emergency sessions about containment protocols that were already obsolete before implementation. Legal experts debated frameworks for managing individuals who exceeded standard categorization. All of it felt like arranging furniture on a ship that was already sinking. In his guest quarters, Izayoi packed nothing because he'd brought nothing that mattered. Just put his headphones back on and made final preparations for departure. He'd given this world 3 days to do something that changed his assessment. It hadn't. The rescue today wasn't obligation, wasn't contribution to society. Just one last demonstration that he acted according to his own judgment, regardless of permission or prohibition. Let them process that however they wanted. He wouldn't be here to observe the aftermath. Tomorrow he'd leave. Find the dimensional instability that had brought him here and reverse it. Return to Little Garden or somewhere else that operated on scales he found less disappointing. This world would continue without him. Threats would arise. Heroes would respond. Society would adjust or collapse according to its own resilience, none of which required his presence or concern. He'd been a visitor, brief, effective when he chose to be, but never actually part of the landscape. Just something that passed through and changed perspective without changing nature. The music played. The city settled into night. And one last time Izayoi looked at Tokyo spread below and acknowledged what he'd learned here. This world didn't need peace. Peace implied stability, maintenance of comfortable systems, prevention of disruption. What it needed was something that ended things when they went too far. When threats exceeded capacity, when systems failed their own purpose. Not a symbol of peace, a line, a boundary, a point beyond which things didn't pass because someone existed who made that choice. He'd been that boundary for a few weeks, demonstrated what it looked like, left them with evidence that such things were possible. Whether they learned from it or continued trying to fit absolute capability into managed frameworks wasn't his concern. He'd done what he came here to do without knowing he was supposed to do it. Now it was time to leave. The city breathed, continued, processed. Tomorrow would bring absence where overwhelming presence had been. Society would react with relief or fear or both. Systems would adjust to accommodate the hole his departure created. Or they wouldn't. Either way, Izayoi Sakamaki would be somewhere else, finding challenges worthy of attention. And this world would have to learn what protection meant when the protector refused to be owned.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.